Section 25 of the Exemplary Novels of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Herndon Bell. The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly. The Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 1. In the famous city of Burgos there lived two wealthy cavaliers, one of whom was called Don Diego de Carriazo, and the other Don Juan de Avendaño. Don Diego had a son called after himself, and Don Juan another, whose name was Don Tomas de Avendaño. These two young gentlemen being the principal persons of the following tale, we shall, for the sake of brevity, call them Carriazo and Avendaño. Carriazo might be about 13, or little more, when, prompted by a scampish disposition, without having had any cause to complain of bad treatment at home, he ran away from his father's house, and cast himself upon the wide world. So much did he enjoy a life of unrestricted freedom, that amidst all the wants and discomforts attendant upon it, he never missed the plenty of his father's house. He neither tired of trudging on foot, nor cared for cold or heat. For him all seasons of the year were genial spring. His sleep was as sound on a heap of straw as on soft mattresses, and he made himself as snug in a hayloft as between two Holland sheets. In short, he made such way in the profession he had chosen, that he could have given lessons to the famous Guzman de Alfarache. During the 3 years he absented himself from home, he learned to play at sheepshanks in Madrid, at rentoy in the public houses of Toledo, and at presa y pinta in the barbacans of Seville. In spite of the sordid penury of his way of life, Carriazo showed himself a prince in his actions. It was easy to see by 1,000 tokens that he came of gentle blood. His generosity gained him the esteem of all his comrades. He seldom was present at drinking bouts, and though he drank wine, it was in moderation, and he carried it well. He was not one of those unlucky drinkers who, whenever they exceed a little, show it immediately in their faces, which look as if they were painted with vermilion or red ochre. In short, the world beheld in Carriazo a virtuous, honourable, well-bred rogue, of more than common ability. He passed through all the degrees of roguery till he graduated as a master in the tunny fisheries of Zahara, the chief school of the art of kitchen-walloping rogues, fat and shining with grease; feigned cripples, cut-purses of Zocodober and the Plaza of Madrid; sanctimonious patterers of prayers; Seville porters; bullies of the Hampa, and all the countless hosts comprised under the denomination of rogues. Never presume to call yourself by that name if you have not gone through 2 courses at least in the academy of the tunny fisheries. There it is that you may see converging as it were in one grand focus, toil and idleness, filth and spruceness, sharp-set hunger and lavish plenty, vice without disguise, incessant gambling, brawls, and quarrels every hour in the day, murders every now and then, ribaldry and obscenity, singing, dancing, laughing, swearing, cheating, and thieving without end. There many a man of quality seeks for his truant son, nor seeks in vain, and the youth feels as acutely the pain of being torn from that life of licence as though he were going to meet his death. But this joyous life has its bitters as well as its sweets. No one can lie down to sleep securely in Zahara, but must always have the dread hanging over him of being carried off to Barbary at any moment. For this reason they all withdraw at night into some fortified places on the coast, and place scouts and sentinels to watch whilst they sleep. But in spite of all precautions, it has sometimes happened that scouts, sentinels, rogues, overseers, boats, nets, and all the posse comitatus of the place have begun the night in Spain, and have seen the dawn in Tetuan. No apprehensions of this kind, however, could deter Carriazo from spending 3 successive summers at the fisheries for his pastime; and such was his luck during his 3rd season, that he won at cards about 700 reales, with which he resolved to buy himself good clothes, return to Burgos, and gladden the heart of his sorrowing mother. He took a most affectionate leave of his many dear friends, assuring them that nothing but sickness or death should prevent his being with them in the following summer, for his heart was in Zahara, and to his eyes its parched sands were fresher than all the verdure of the Elysian fields. Ambling merrily along on Shank's mare, he arrived at Valladolid, where he stopped a fortnight to get rid of the mahogany hue of his complexion, and to change his rogue's costume for that of a gentleman. Having equipped himself properly, he had still 100 reales left, which he spent on the hire of a mule and a servant, that he might make a good figure when he presented himself to his parents. They received him with the utmost joy, and all the friends and relations of the family came to congratulate them on the safe arrival of their son Don Diego de Carriazo. I had forgotten to mention that during his peregrination Don Diego had taken the name of Vidialis, and by that name alone he was known to his new acquaintances. Among those who came to see the new arrival were Don Juan de Avendaño and his son Don Tomas, with the latter of whom, as they are both of the same age and neighbours, Carriazo contracted a very close friendship. Carriazo gave his parents a long and circumstantial account of all the fine things he had seen and done during the 3 years he had been from home, in all which there was not one word of truth, but he never so much as hinted at the tunny fisheries, though they were constantly in his thoughts, more especially as the time approached in which he had promised his friends he would return to them. He took no pleasure in the chase with which his father sought often to divert him, nor in any of the convivial meetings of that hospitable city. All kinds of amusements wearied him, and the best enjoyments that could be offered to him were not to be compared, he thought, with those he had known at the tunny fisheries. His friend Avendaño, finding him often melancholy and musing, ventured to inquire after the cause, at the same time professing his readiness to assist his friend in any way that might be requisite, and to the utmost of his power, even at the cost of his blood. Carriazo felt that it would be wronging the great friendship subsisting between him and Avendaño if he concealed from the latter the cause of his present sadness, and therefore he described to him in detail the life he had led at Zahara, and declared that all his gloom arose from his strong desire to be there once more. So attractive was the picture he drew, that Avendaño, far from blaming his taste, expressed his entire sympathy with it. The end of the matter was that Avendaño determined to go off with Carriazo, and enjoy for one summer that delicious life of which he had just heard such a glowing description, and in this determination he was strongly encouraged to persist by Carriazo, who was glad to be so countenanced in his own low propensities. They set their wits to work to see how they could scrape together as much money as possible, and the best means that occurred to them was that suggested by Avendaño's approaching departure for Salamanca, where he had already studied for 3 years, and where his father wished him to complete his education, and take a degree in whatever faculty he pleased. Carriazo now made known to his father that he had a strong desire to go with Avendaño and study at Salamanca. Don Diego gladly fell in with his son's proposal. He talked with his friend Don Juan on the subject, and it was agreed between them that the 2 young men should reside together at Salamanca, and be sent thither well supplied with all requisites, and in a manner suitable to the sons of men of quality. The time for their departure being arrived, they were furnished with money, and with a tutor who was more remarkable for integrity than for mother wit. Their fathers talked much and impressively to their sons about what they should do, and how they should govern themselves, in order that they might become fraught with virtue and knowledge, for that is the fruit from which every student should aspire to reap from his labours and his vigils, especially such as are of good family. The sons were all humility and obedience. Their mothers cried. Both parents gave them their blessing, and away they went mounted on their own mules, and attended by two servants of their respective households, besides the tutor, who had let his beard grow to give him a more imposing air of gravity, as became his charge. When they arrived at Valladolid, they told their tutor they should like to remain there a couple of days to see the city, having never been in it before. The tutor severely reprimanded them for entertaining any such idle notion, telling them they had no time to lose in silly diversions, that their business was to get as fast as possible to the place where they were to pursue their studies, that he should be doing extreme violence to his conscience if he allowed them to stop for 1 hour, not to speak of 2 days, that they should continue their journey forthwith, or if not, then brown bread should be their portion. Such was the extent of the ability in his office possessed by this tutor, or major domo, as we should rather call him. The lads, who had already gathered in their harvest, since they had laid hands upon 400 gold crowns which were in the major domo's keeping, begged that he would let them remain in Valladolid for that day only, that they might see the grand aqueducts, which were then in course of construction, for the purpose of conveying the waters of Argales to that city. He consented at last, but with extreme reluctance, for he wished to avoid the expense of an additional day on the road, and to spend the night at Valdeastellas, whence he could easily reach Salamanca in 2 days. But the bay horse thinks one thing, and the man on his back another thing, and so it proved in the major domo's case. The lads, mounted on 2 excellent mules, and attended by only 1 servant, rode out to see the fountain of Argales, famous for its antiquity and the abundance of its water. On their arrival there, Avendaño gave the servant a sealed paper, bidding him return forthwith to the city and deliver it to his tutor, after which the servant was to wait for them at the Puerta del Campo. The servant did as he was bid, and went back to the city with the letter, and they, turning their mules' heads another way, slept that night in Mojados, and arrived 2 days afterwards in Madrid, where they sold their mules. They dressed themselves like peasants in short jerkins, loose breeches, and grey stockings. An old clothes dealer, to whom they had sold their handsome apparel in the morning, transformed them by night in such a manner that their own mothers would not have known them. Lightly equipped, as suited their purpose, and without swords, for they had sold them to the old clothes dealer, they took to the road to Toledo. There let us leave them for the present, stepping out briskly with merry hearts, while we return to the tutor, and see him open the letter delivered to him by the servant, which he read as follows: "Your worship, Señor Pedro Alonso, will be pleased to have patience, and go back to Burgos, where you will say to our parents that we, their sons, having with mature deliberation considered how much more arms befit cavaliers than do letters, have determined to exchange Salamanca for Brussels, and Spain for Flanders. We have got the 400 crowns, the mules we intend to sell. The course we have chosen, which is so worthy of persons of our quality, and the length of the journey before us, are sufficient to excuse our fault, though a fault it will not be deemed by any one but a coward. Our departure takes place now. Our return will be when it shall please God, to whose keeping we, your humble pupils, heartily commend you. Given from the fountain of Argales, with 1 foot in the stirrup for Flanders. Carriazo, Avendaño." Aghast at the contents of this letter, Pedro Alonso hurried to his valise, and found that the paper spoke but too truly, for the money was gone. Instantly mounting the remaining mule, he returned to Burgos to carry these tidings to his patrons, in order that they might take measures to recover possession of their sons' persons. But as to how he was received, the author of this tale says not a word, for the moment he has put Pedro Alonso into the saddle, he leaves him to give the following account of what occurred to Avendaño and Carriazo at the entrance of Illescas. Just by the town gate they met 2 muleteers, Andalusians apparently, one of whom was coming from Seville, and the other going thither. Said the latter to the former, "If my masters are not so far ahead, I should like to stop a little longer to ask you 1,000 things I want to know, for I am quite astonished at what you have told me about the Condes, having hanged Alonso Gines and Ribera without giving them leave to appeal." "As I'm a sinner," replied the Sevillian, "the conde laid a trap for them, got them under his jurisdiction, for they were soldiers, and once having them in his grip, the Court of Appeal could never let them out of it. I tell you what it is, friend, he has a devil within him, that same Conde de Puñonrostro. Seville and the whole country round it for 10 leagues is swept clear of swashbucklers. Not a thief ventures within his limits. They all fear him like fire. It is whispered, however, that he will soon give up his place as corregidor, for he is tired of being at loggerheads at every hand's turn with the señores of the Court of Appeal." "May they live 1,000 years," exclaimed he who was going to Seville, "for they are the fathers of the miserable and a refuge for the unfortunate. How many poor fellows must eat dirt, for no other reason than the anger of an arbitrary judge of a corregidor, either ill informed or wrong headed. Many eyes see more than two. The venom of injustice cannot so soon lay hold on many hearts as on one alone." "You have turned preacher," said he of Seville, "but I'm afraid I can't stop to hear the end of your sermon. Don't put up to night at your usual place, but go to the Posada del Sevillano, for there you will see the prettiest scullery wench I know. Marinilla at the Venta Tejada is a dishclout in comparison with her. I will only tell you that it is said the son of the corregidor is very sweet upon her. One of my masters gone on ahead there swears that on his way back to Andalusia he will stop 2 months in Toledo, and in that same inn, only to have his fill of looking at her. I myself ventured once to give her a little bit of a squeeze, and all I got for it was a swinging box on the ear. She is as hard as a flint, as savage as a kestrel, and as touch-me-not as a nettle. But she has a face that does a body's eyes good to look at. She has the sun in one cheek and the moon in the other. The one is made of roses and the other of carnations, and between them both are lilies and jessamine. I say no more, only see her for yourself, and you will see that all that I have told you is nothing to what I might say of her beauty. I'd freely settle upon her those 2 silver grey mules of mine, that you know, if they would let me have her for my wife. But I know they won't, for she is a morsel for an archbishop or a conde. Once more I say, go and see her, and so good bye to you, for I must be off." The 2 muleteers went their several ways, leaving the 2 friends much struck by what they had overheard of the conversation, especially Avendaño, in whom the mere relation that the muleteer had given of the scullery-maid's beauty awoke an intense desire to see her. It had the same effect on Carriazo, but not to an equal degree, nor so as to extinguish his desire to reach his beloved tunny fisheries, from which he would not willingly be delayed to behold the pyramids of Egypt, or any or all of the other 7 wonders of the world. Repeating the dialogue between the muleteers, and mimicking their tones and gestures, served as pastime to beguile the way until they reached Toledo. Carriazo, who had been there before, led the way at once to the Posada del Sevillano, but they did not venture to ask for accommodation there, their dress and appearance not being such as would have gained them a ready welcome. Night was coming on, and though Carriazo importuned Avendaño to go with him in search of lodgings elsewhere, he could not prevail on him to quit the doors of the Sevillano, or cease from hanging about them upon the chance that the celebrated scullery-maid might perhaps make her appearance. When it was pitch dark, Carriazo was in despair, but still Avendaño stuck to the spot, and at last he went to the courtyard of the inn, under pretence of inquiring about some gentlemen of Burgos who were on their way to Seville. He had but just entered the courtyard, when a girl, who seemed to be about 15 and was dressed in working clothes, came out of one of the side doors with a lighted candle. Avendaño's eyes did not rest on the girl's dress, but on her face, which seemed to him such as a painter would give to the angels, and so overcome was he by her beauty that he could only gaze at it in speechless admiration, without being able to say one word for himself. "What may you please to want, brother?" said the girl. "Are you servant to one of the gentlemen in the house?" "I am no one's servant but yours," replied Avendaño, trembling with emotion. "Go to, brother," returned the girl disdainfully. "We who are servants ourselves have no need of others to wait on us." And calling her master, she said, "Please to see, sir, what this lad wants." The master came out, and in reply to his question, Avendaño said that he was looking for some gentlemen of Burgos who were on their way to Seville. One of them was his master, and had sent him on before them to Alcalá de Henares upon business of importance, bidding him, when that was done, to proceed to Toledo, and to wait for him at the Sevillano; and he believed that his master would arrive there that night or the following day at farthest. So plausibly did Avendaño tell this fib, that the landlord was quite taken in by it. "Very well, friend," he said, "you may stop here till your master comes." "Many thanks, señor landlord," replied Avendaño. "And will your worship bid them give me a room for myself and a comrade of mine who is outside? We have got money to pay for it, as well as another." "Certainly," said the host, and turning to the girl he said, "Costanza, bid la Argüello take these two gallants to the corner room and give them clean sheets." "I will do so, señor," and curtseying to her master she went away, leaving Avendaño by her departure in a state of feeling like that of a tired wayfarer when the sun sets and he finds himself wrapped in cheerless darkness. He went, however, to give an account of what he had seen and done to Carriazo, who very soon perceived that his friend had been smitten in the heart; but he would not say a word about the matter then, until he could see whether there was a fair excuse for the hyperbolical praises with which Avendaño exalted the beauty of Costanza above the stars. At last they went indoors, and la Argüello, the chambermaid, a woman of some 45 years of age, showed them a room which was neither a gentleman's nor a servant's, but something between the two. On their asking for supper, la Argüello told them they did not provide meals in that inn. They only cooked and served up such food as the guests bought and fetched for themselves; but there were eating houses in the neighbourhood where they might without scruple of conscience go and sup as they pleased. The two friends took la Argüello's advice, and went to the eating house, where Carriazo supped on what they set before him, and Avendaño on what he had brought with him, to wit, thoughts and fancies. Carriazo noticed that his friend ate little or nothing, and by way of sounding him, he said on their way back to the inn, "We must be up betimes to morrow morning, so that we may reach Orgez before the heat of the day." "I am not disposed for that," replied Avendaño, "for I intend, before I leave this city, to see all that is worth seeing in it, such as the cathedral, the waterworks of Juanelo, the view from the top of St. Augustine's, the King's Garden, and the promenade by the river." "Very well, we can see all that in 2 days." "What need of such haste? We are not posting to Rome to ask for a vacant benefice." "Ha, ha, friend, I see how it is. I'll be hanged if you are not more inclined to stay in Toledo than to continue our journey." "That's true, I confess. It is as impossible for me to forego the sight of that girl's face as it is to get into heaven without good works." "Gallantly spoken, and as becomes a generous breast like yours. Here's a pretty story. Don Tomas de Avendaño, son of the wealthy and noble cavalier Don Juan de Avendaño, over head and ears in love with the scullery-maid at the Posada del Sevillano. It strikes me I may answer you in the same strain. Here's Don Diego de Carriazo, son and sole heir of the noble knight of Alcántara of the same name, a youth finely gifted alike in body and mind, and behold him in love. With whom, do you suppose? With Queen Ginevra? No such thing, but with the tunny fisheries of Zahara, and all its rogues and rascals, a more loathsome crew, I suspect, than ever beset Saint Anthony in his temptations. You have given me tit for tat, friend, and slain me with my own weapon. Let us say no more now, but go to bed, and to morrow, who knows but we come to our senses." Look ye, Carriazo, you have not yet seen Costanza. When you have seen her, I will give you leave to say what you like to me." "Well, I know beforehand what will be the upshot of the matter." "And that is?" "That I shall be off to my tunny fisheries, and you will remain with your scullery-maid." "I shall not be so happy." "Nor I such a fool as to give up my own good purpose for the sake of your bad one." By this time they reached the inn, where the conversation was prolonged in the same tone half the night long. After they had slept, as it seemed to them, little more than an hour, they were awakened by the loud sound of clarions in the street. They sat up in bed, and after they listened a while, "I'll lay a wager," said Carriazo, "that it is already day, and that there is some feast or other in the convent of Nostra Senora del Carmen in this neighbourhood, and that is why the clarions are pealing." "That can't be," said Avendaño. "We have not been long asleep. It must be some time yet till dawn." While they were talking, some one knocked at the door and called out, "Young men, if you want to hear some fine music, go to the window of the next room, which looks on the street. It is not occupied." They got up and opened the door, but the person who had spoken was gone. The music still continuing, however, they went in their shirts, just as they were, into the front room, where they found 3 or 4 other lodgers, who made place for them at the window, and soon afterwards an excellent voice sang a sonnet to the accompaniment of the harp. There was no need of any one to tell Carriazo and Avendaño that this music was intended for Costanza, for this was very clear from the words of the sonnet, which grated so horribly on Avendaño's ears that he could have wished himself deaf rather than have heard it. The pangs of jealousy laid hold on him, and the worst of all was that he knew not who was his rival. But this was soon made known to him when one of the persons in the window exclaimed, "What a simpleton is the corregidor's son, to make a practice of serenading a scullery-maid! It is true she is one of the most beautiful girls I have ever seen, and I have seen a great many, but that is no reason why he should court her so publicly." "After all," said another, "I have been told for certain that she makes no more account of him than if he never existed. I warrant she is this moment fast asleep behind her mistress's bed, without ever thinking of all this music." "I can well believe it," said the first speaker, "for she is the most virtuous girl I know, and it is marvellous that though she lives in a house like this, where there is so much traffic, and where there are newcomers every day, and though she goes about all the rooms, not the least thing in the world is known to her disparagement." Avendaño began to breathe more freely after hearing this, and was able to listen to many fine things, which were sung to the accompaniment of various instruments, all being addressed to Costanza, who, as the stranger said, was fast asleep all the while. End of the Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 1. Section 26 of the Exemplary Novels of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Herndon Bell. The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly. The Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 2. The musicians departed at the approach of dawn. Avendaño and Carriazo returned to their room, where one of them slept till morning. They then rose, both of them eager to see Costanza, but the one only from curiosity, the other from love. Both were gratified, for Costanza came out of her master's room looking so lovely that they both felt that all the praises bestowed on her by the muleteer fell immeasurably short of her deserts. She was dressed in a green bodice and petticoat, trimmed with the same colour. A collar embroidered with black silk set off the alabaster whiteness of her neck. The thick tresses of her bright chestnut hair were bound up with white ribbon. She had pendants in her ears, which seemed to be pearls, but were only glass. Her girdle was a St. Francis cord, and a large bunch of keys hung at her side. When she came out of the room, she crossed herself, and made a profound reverence with great devotion to an image of Our Lady that hung on one of the walls of the quadrangle. Then, looking up and seeing the two young men intently gazing on her, she immediately retired again into the room, and called thence to Argüello to get up. Carriazo, it must be owned, was much struck by Costanza's beauty. He admired it as much as his companion, only he did not fall in love with her. On the contrary, he had no desire to spend another night in the inn, but to set out at once for the fisheries. La Argüello presently appeared in the gallery with two young women, natives of Galicia, who were also servants in the inn, for the number employed in the Sevillano was considerable, that being one of the best and most frequented houses of its kind in Toledo. At the same time, the servants of the persons lodging in the inn began to assemble to receive oats for their masters' beasts, and the host dealt them out, all the while grumbling and swearing at his maidservants, who had been the cause of his losing the services of a capital hostler, who did the work so well and kept such good reckoning that he did not think he had ever lost the price of a grain of oats by him. Avendaño, who heard all this, seized the opportunity at once. "Don't fatigue yourself, señor host," he said. "Give me the account book, and whilst I remain here I will give out the oats, and keep such an exact count of it that you will not miss the hostler who you say has left you." "Truly, I thank you for the offer, my lad," said the host, "for I have no time to attend to this business. I have too much to do, both indoors and out of doors. Come down, and I will give you the book, and mind ye, these muleteers are the very devil, and will do you out of a peck of oats under your very nose, with no more conscience than if it were so much chaff." Avendaño went down to the quadrangle, took the book, and began to serve out pecks of oats like water, and to note them down with such exactness that the landlord, who stood watching him, was greatly pleased with his performance. "I wish to God," he said, "your master would not come, and that you would make up your mind to stop with me. You would lose nothing by the change, believe me. The hostler who has just quitted me came here 8 months ago all in tatters, and as lean as a shotten herring, and now he has 2 very good suits of clothes, and is as fat as a dormouse. For you must know, my son, that in this house there are excellent vails to be got over and above the wages." "If I should stop," replied Avendaño, "I should not stand out much for the matter of what I should gain, but should be content with very little for sake of being in this city, which they tell me is the best in Spain." "At least it is one of the best, and most plentiful," said the host. "But we are in want of another thing too, and that is a man to fetch water, for the lad that used to attend to that job has also left me. He was a smart fellow, and with the help of a famous ass of mine he used to keep all the tanks overflowing, and make a lake of the house. One of the reasons why the muleteers like to bring their employers to my house is, that they always find plenty of water in it for their beasts, instead of having to drive them down to the river." Carriazo, who had been listening to this dialogue, and who saw Avendaño already installed in office, thought he would follow his example, well knowing how much it would gratify him. "Out with the ass, señor host," he said. "I'm your man, and will do your work as much to your satisfaction as my comrade." "Ay, indeed," said Avendaño. "My comrade Lope Asturiano will fetch water like a prince. I'll go bail for him." La Argüello, who had been all the while within earshot, here put in her word. "And pray, my gentleman," said she to Avendaño, "who is to go bail for you? By my faith, you look to me as if you wanted some one to answer for you, instead of you answering for another." "Hold your tongue, Argüello," said her master. "Don't put yourself forward where you're not wanted. I'll go bail for them, both of them; and mind, I tell you, that none of you women meddle or make with the men servants, for it is through you they all leave me." "So these two chaps are engaged, are they?" said another of the servant women. "By my soul, if I had to keep them company I would never trust them with the wine bag." "None of your jibes, señora Gallega," cried her master. "Do your work, and don't meddle with the men servants, or I'll baste you with a stick." "Oh, to be sure," replied the Galician damsel. Ain't they dainty dears to make a body's mouth water? I'm sure master has never known me so frolicsome with the chaps in the house, nor yet out of it, that he should have such an opinion of me. The blackguards go away when they take it into their heads, without our giving them any occasion. Very like, indeed, they're the right sort to be in need of any one's putting them to bidding their masters an early good morning when they least expect it. You've a deal to say for yourself, my friend, said the landlord. Shut your mouth and mind your business. While this colloquy was going on, Carriazo had harnessed the ass, jumped on his back, and set off to the river, leaving Avendaño highly delighted at witnessing his jovial resolution. Here, then, we have Avendaño and Carriazo changed, God save the mark, into Tomas Pedro, a hostler, and Lope Asturiano, a water carrier. Transformations surpassing those of the long-nosed poet. No sooner had La Argüello heard that they were hired, than she formed a design upon Asturiano, and marked him for her own, resolving to regale him in such a manner that, if he were ever so shy, she would make him as pliant as a glove. The prudish Gallegan formed a similar design upon Avendaño, and as the two women were great friends, being much together in their business by day and bedfellows at night, they at once confided their amorous purposes to each other, and that night they determined to begin the conquest of their two unimpassioned swains. Moreover, they agreed that they must, in the first place, beg them not to be jealous about anything they might see them do with their persons, for girls could hardly regale their friends within doors, unless they put those without under contribution. "Hold your tongues, lad," said they, apostrophizing their absent lovers. "Hold your tongues and shut your eyes. Leave the timbrel in the hands that can play it, and let those lead the dance that know how, and no pair of cannons in this city will be better regaled than you will be by our two selves." While the Gallegan and La Argüello were settling matters in this way, our good friend Lope Asturiano was on his way to the river, musing upon his beloved tunny fisheries, and on his sudden change of condition. Whether it was for this reason, or that fate ordained it so, it happened that as he was riding down a steep and narrow lane, he ran against another water carrier's ass, which was coming laden uphill, and as his own was fresh and lively and in good condition, the poor half-starved jaded brute that was toiling uphill was knocked down, the pitchers were broken, and the water spilled. The driver of the fallen ass, enraged by this disaster, immediately flew upon the offender, and pommelled him soundly before poor Lope well knew where he was. At last his senses were roused with a vengeance, and seizing his antagonist with both hands by the throat, he dashed him to the ground. That was not all, for unluckily the man's head struck violently against a stone. The wound was frightful, and bled so profusely that Lope thought he had killed him. Several other water carriers, who were on their way to and from the river, seeing their comrade so maltreated, seized Lope and held him fast, shouting, "Justice! Justice! This water carrier has murdered a man!" And all the while they beat and thumped him lustily. Others ran to the fallen man, and found that his skull was cracked, and that he was almost at the last gasp. The outcry spread all up the hill into the Plaza del Carmen, where it reached the ears of an alguazil, who flew to the spot with two police runners. They did not arrive a moment too soon, for they found Lope surrounded by more than a score of water carriers, who were basting his ribs at such a rate that there was almost as much reason to fear for his life as that of the wounded man. The alguazil took him out of their hands, delivered him and his ass into those of his followers, had the wounded man laid like a sack upon his own ass, and marched them all off to prison, attended by such a crowd that they could hardly make way through the streets. The noise drew Tomas Pedro and his master to the door, and to their great surprise they saw Asturiano led by in the grip of two police runners, with his face all bloody. The landlord immediately looked about for his ass, and saw it in the hands of another catchpole, who had joined the alguazil's party. He inquired the cause of these captures, was told what had happened, and was sorely distressed on account of his ass, fearing that he should lose it, or have to pay more for it than it was worth. Tomas followed his comrade, but could not speak a single word to him, such was the throng around the prisoner and the strictness of the catchpoles. Lope was thrust into a narrow cell in the prison, with a doubly grated window, and the wounded man was taken to the infirmary, where the surgeon pronounced his case extremely dangerous. The alguazil took home the 2 asses with him, besides 5 pieces of 8 which had been found on Lope. Tomas returned greatly disconcerted to the inn, where he found the landlord in no better spirits than himself, and gave him an account of the condition in which he had left his comrade, the danger of the wounded man, and the fate of the ass. "To add to the misfortune," said he, "I have just met a gentleman of Burgos, who tells me that my master will not now come this way. In order to make more speed and shorten his journey by 2 leagues, he has crossed the ferry at Azeca. He will sleep to night at Orgaz, and has sent me 12 crowns, with orders to meet him at Seville. But that cannot be, for it is not in reason that I should leave my friend and comrade in prison and in such peril. My master must excuse me for the present, and I know he will, for he is so good-natured that he will put up with a little inconvenience rather than that I should forsake my comrade. Will you do me the favour, señor, to take this money, and see what you can do in this business? While you are spending this, I will write to my master for more, telling him all that has happened, and I am sure he will send us enough to get us out of any scrape." The host opened his eyes a palm wide in glad surprise to find himself indemnified for the loss of his ass. He took the money and comforted Tomas, telling him that he could make interest with persons of great influence in Toledo, especially a nun, a relation of the corregidor's, who could do anything she pleased with him. Now the washerwoman of the convent in which the nun lived had a daughter, who was very thick indeed, with the sister of a friar, who was hand in glove with the said nun's confessor. All he had to do then was to get the washerwoman to ask her daughter, to get the monk's sister to speak to her brother, to say a good word to the confessor, who would prevail on the nun to write a note to the corregidor, begging him to look into Lope's business, and then, beyond a doubt, they might expect to come off with flying colours. That is, provided the water-carrier did not die of his wound, and provided also there was no lack of stuff to grease the palms of all the officers of justice. For unless they are well greased, they creak worse than the wheels of a bullock cart. Whatever Tomas thought of this roundabout way of making interest, he failed not to thank the innkeeper, and to assure him that he was confident his master would readily send the requisite money. Argüello, who had seen her new flame in the hands of the officers, ran directly to the prison with some dinner for him, but she was not permitted to see him. This was a great grief to her, but she did not lose her hopes for all that. After the lapse of a fortnight, the wounded man was out of danger, and in a week more the surgeon pronounced him cured. During this time Tomas Pedro pretended to have had 50 crowns sent to him from Seville, and taking them out of his pocket, he presented them to the innkeeper, along with a fictitious letter from his master. It was nothing to the landlord whether the letter was genuine or not, so he gave himself no trouble to authenticate it. But he received the 50 good gold crowns with great glee. The end of the matter was, that the wounded man was quieted with 6 ducats, and Asturiano was sentenced to the forfeiture of his ass, and a fine of 10 ducats with costs, on the payment of which he was liberated. On his release from prison, Asturiano had no mind to go back to Sevillano, but excused himself to his comrade on the ground that during his confinement he had been visited by Argüello, who had pestered him with her fulsome advances, which were to him so sickening and insufferable that he would rather be hanged than comply with the desires of so odious a jade. His intention was to buy an ass, and to do business as a water-carrier on his own account as long as they remained in Toledo. This would protect him from the risk of being arrested as a vagabond. Besides, it was a business he could carry on with great ease and satisfaction to himself, since with only 1 load of water he could saunter about the city all day long, looking at silly wenches. "Looking at beautiful women, you mean," said his friend, "for of all the cities in Spain Toledo has the reputation of being that in which the women surpass all others, whether in beauty or conduct. If you doubt it, only look at Costanza, who could spare from her superfluity of loveliness charms enough to beautify the rest of the women, not only of Toledo, but of the whole world. Gently, Señor Tomas. Not so fast with your praises of the señora scullion, unless you wish that, besides thinking you a fool, I take you for a heretic into the bargain. Do you call Costanza a scullion, brother Lope? God forgive you, and bring you to a true sense of your error. And is she not a scullion? I have yet to see her wash the first plate. What does that matter, if you have seen her wash the second or the 50th? I tell you, brother, she does not wash dishes, or do anything but look after the business of the house, and take care of the plate, of which there is a great deal. How is it, then, that throughout the whole city they call her the illustrious scullery-maid, if so be she does not wash dishes? Perhaps it is because she washes silver and not crockery that they give her that name. But to drop this subject, tell me, Tomas, how stand your hopes? In a state of perdition, for during the whole time you were in jail I never have been able to say one word to her. It is true that to all that is said to her by the guests in the house, she makes no other reply than to cast down her eyes and keep her lips closed. Such is her virtue and modesty, so that her modesty excites my love no less than her beauty. But it is almost too much for my patience to think that the corregidor's son, who is an impetuous and somewhat licentious youth, is dying for her. A night seldom passes but he serenades her, and that so openly that she is actually named in the songs sung in her praise. She never hears them, to be sure, nor ever quits her mistress's room from the time she retires until morning. But in spite of all that, my heart cannot escape being pierced by the keen shaft of jealousy. What do you intend to do, then, with this Portia, this Minerva, this new Penelope, who under the form of a scullery-maid has vanquished your heart? Her name is Costanza, not Portia, Minerva, or Penelope. That she is a servant in an inn I cannot deny. But what can I do if, as it seems, the occult force of destiny and the deliberate choice of reason both impel me to adore her? Look you, friend, I cannot find words to tell you how love exalts and glorifies in my eyes this humble scullery-maid, as you call her, so that, though seeing her low condition, I am blind to it, and knowing it, I ignore it. Try as I may, it is impossible for me to keep it long before my eyes, for that thought is at once obliterated by her beauty, her grace, her virtue, and modesty, which tell me that beneath that plebeian husk must be concealed some kernel of extraordinary worth. In short, be it what it may, I love her, and not with that commonplace love I have felt for others, but with a passion so pure that it knows no wish beyond that of serving her, and prevailing on her to love me, and return in the like kind what is due to my honourable affection." Here Lope gave a shout, and cried out in declamatory tone, "O platonic love! O illustrious scullery-maid! O thrice blessed age of ours, wherein we see love renewing the marvels of the age of gold! O my poor tunnies, you must pass this year without a visit from your impassioned admirer, but next year be sure I will make amends, and you shall no longer find me a truant." "I see, Asturiano," said Tomas, "how openly you mock me. Why don't you go to your fisheries? There is nothing to hinder you. I will remain where I am, and you will find me here on your return. If you wish to take your share of the money with you, take it at once. Go your ways in peace, and let each of us follow the course prescribed to him by his own destiny." "I thought you had more sense," said Lope. "Don't you know that I was only joking? But now that I perceive you are in earnest, I will serve you in earnest in everything I can do to please you. Only one thing I entreat in return for the many I intend to do for you. Do not expose me to Argüello's persecution, for I would rather lose your friendship than have to endure hers. Good God, friend, Her tongue goes like the clapper of a mill. You can smell her breath a league off. All her front teeth are false, and it is my private opinion that she does not wear her own hair, but a wig. To crown all, since she began to make overtures to me, she has taken to painting white, till her face looks like nothing but a mask of plaster. True, indeed, my poor comrade. She is worse even than the Gallegan, who makes me suffer martyrdom. I'll tell you what we shall do. Only stay this night in the inn, and to-morrow you shall buy yourself an ass, find a lodging, and so secure yourself from the importunities of Argüello, whilst I remain exposed to those of the Gallegan, and to the fire of my Costanza's eyes." Thus being agreed on, the two friends returned to the inn, where Asturiano was received with great demonstrations of love by Argüello. That night a great number of muleteers stopping in the house, and those near it, got up a dance before the door of the Sevillano. Asturiano played the guitar. The female dancers were the two Gallegans and Argüello, and three girls from another inn. Many persons stood by as spectators, with their faces muffled, prompted more by a desire to see Costanza than the dance, but they were disappointed, for she did not make an appearance. Asturiano played for the dancers with such spirit and precision of touch that they all vowed he made the guitar speak. But just as he was doing his best, accompanying the instrument with his voice, and the dancers were capering like mad, one of the muffled spectators cried out, "Stop, you drunken sot! Hold your noise, wine-skin, piperly poet, miserable cat-gut scraper!" Several others followed up this insulting speech with such a torrent of abuse that Lope thought it best to cease playing and singing. But the muleteers took the interruption so much amiss, that had it not been for the earnest endeavours of the landlord to appease them, there would have been a terrible row. In spite, indeed, of all he could do, the muleteers would not have kept their hands quiet had not the watch happened just then to come up and clear the ground. A moment afterwards the ears of all who were awake in the quarter were greeted by an admirable voice proceeding from a man who had seated himself on a stone opposite the door of the Sevillano. Every one listened with rapt attention to his song, but none more so than Tomas Pedro, to whom every word sounded like a sentence of excommunication, for the romance ran thus: "In what celestial realms of space is hid that beauteous witching face? Where shines that star which, boding ills, my trembling heart with torment fills? Why in its wrath should heaven decree that we no more its light should see? Why bid that sun no longer cheer with glorious beams our drooping sphere? Yes, second sun, 'tis true you shine, but not for us, with light divine. Yet gracious come from ocean's bed, why hide from us your radiant head? Constance, a faithful dying swain, adores your beauty, though in vain. For when his love he would impart, you fly and scorn his proffered heart. O let his tears your pity sway, and quick he'll bear you hence away. For shame it is this sordid place should do your charms such foul disgrace. Here you're submissive to control, sweet mistress of my doting soul. But altars youths to you should raise, and passioned votaries sound your praise. Quit then a scene which must consume unworthily your early bloom. To my soft vows your ear incline, nor frown, but be for ever mine. His gladsome torch let Hymen light, and let the god our hearts unite. This day would then, before its end, see me your husband, lover, friend." The last line was immediately followed by the flight of two brickbats, which fell close to the singer's feet, but had they come in contact with his head, they would certainly have knocked all the music and poetry out of it. The poor frightened musician took to his heels with such speed that a greyhound could not have caught him. Unhappy fate of night birds, to be always subject to such showers! All who had heard the voice of the fugitive admired it, but most of all Tomas Pedro, only he would rather the words have not been addressed to Costanza, although she had not heard one of them. The only person who found fault with the romance was a muleteer nicknamed Barrabas. As soon as this man saw the singer run off, he bawled after him, "There you go, you Judas of a troubadour! May the fleas eat your eyes out! Who the devil taught you to sing to a scullery-maid about celestial realms and spheres and ocean beds, and to call her stars and suns and all the rest of it? If you had told her she was as straight as asparagus, as white as milk, as modest as a lay brother in his novitiate, more full of humours, and as unmanageable as a hired mule, and harder than a lump of dry mortar, why then she would have understood you and been pleased. But your fine words are fitter for a scholar than for a scullery-maid. Truly, there are poets in the world who write songs that the devil himself could not understand. For my part, at least, Barrabas though I am, I cannot make head or tail of what that fellow has been singing. What did he suppose Costanza could make of them? But she knows better than to listen to such stuff, for she is snug in bed, and cares no more for all these caterwaulers than she does for Prester John. This fellow, at least, is not one of the singers belonging to the corregidor's son, for they are out and out good ones, and a body can generally understand them. But by the Lord, this fellow sets me mad." The bystanders coincided in opinion with Barrabas, and thought his criticism very judicious. Everybody now went to bed, but no sooner was the house all still than Lope heard someone calling very softly at his bedroom door. "Who's there?" said he. "It is we," whispered a voice, "Argüello and the Gallegan. Open the door and let us in, for we are dying of cold." "Dying of cold, indeed," said Lope, "and we are in the middle of the dog days." "Oh, leave off now, friend Lope," said the Gallegan. "Get up and open the door, for here we are as fine as archduchesses." "Archduchesses, and at this hour? I don't believe a word of it, but rather think you must be witches or something worse. Get out of that this moment, or by all that's damnable, if you make me get up, I'll leather you with my belt till your hinder parts are as red as poppies." Finding that he answered them so roughly, and in a manner so contrary to their expectations, the two disappointed damsels returned sadly to their beds, but before they left the door, Argüello put her lips to the keyhole, and hissed through it, "Honey was not made for the mouth of the ass," and with that, as if she had said something very bitter indeed, and taken adequate revenge on the scorner, she went off to her cheerless bed. "Look you, Tomas," said Lope to his companion as soon as they were gone, "set me to fight two giants, or to break the jaws of half a dozen, or a whole dozen of lions, if it be requisite for your service, and I shall do it as readily as I would drink a glass of wine; but that you should put me under the necessity of encountering Argüello, this is what I would never submit to. No, not if I were to be flayed alive. Only think what damsels of Denmark fate has thrown upon us this night. Well, patience. To-morrow will come, thank God, and then we shall see." "I have already told you, friend," replied Tomas, "that you may do as you please, either go on your pilgrimage, or buy an ass and turn water carrier, as you proposed." "I stick to the water carrying business," said Lope. "My mind is made up not to quit you at present." They then went to sleep till daylight, when they rose. Tomas Pedro went to give out oats, and Lope set off to the cattle market to buy an ass. Now it happened that Tomas had spent his leisure on holidays in composing some amorous verses, and had jotted them down in the book in which he kept the account of the oats, intending to copy them out fairly, and then blot them out of the book, or tear out the page. But before he had done so, he happened to go out one day and leave the book on top of the oat bin. His master found it there, and looking into it to see how the account of the oats stood, he lighted upon the verses. Surprised and annoyed, he went off with them to his wife, but before he read them to her, he called Costanza into the room, and peremptorily commanded her to declare whether Tomas Pedro, the hostler, had overmade love to her, or addressed any improper language to her, or any that gave token of his being partial to her. Costanza vowed that Tomas had never yet spoken to her in any such way, nor ever given her reason to suppose that he had any bad thoughts towards her. Her master and mistress believed her, because they had always found her to speak the truth. Having dismissed her, the host turned to his wife and said, "I know not what to say of this matter. You must know, señora, that Tomas has written in this book, in which he keeps the account of the oats, verses that give me an ugly suspicion that he is in love with Costanza." "Let me see the verses," said the wife, "and I'll tell you what we are to conclude." "Oh, of course. As you are a poet, you will at once see into his thoughts." "I am not a poet, but you very well know that I am a woman of understanding, and that I can say the four prayers in Latin." "You would do better to say them in plain Spanish. You know your uncle the priest has told you that you make no end of blunders when you patter your Latin, and that what you say is good for nothing." "That was an arrow from his niece's quiver. She is jealous of seeing me take the Latin hours in hand, and make my way through them as easily as though a vineyard after the vintage." "Well, have it your own way. Listen now. Here are the verses," and he read some impassioned lines addressed to Costanza. "Is there any more?" said the landlady. "No. But what do you think of these verses?" "In the first place, we must make sure they are by Tomas." "Of that there can be no manner of doubt, for the handwriting is most unquestionably the same as that in which the account of the oats is kept. Look ye, husband, it appears to me that although Costanza is named in the verses, whence it may be supposed that they were made for her, we ought not for that reason to set the fact down for certain, just as if we have seen them written, for there are other Costanzas in the world besides ours. But even supposing they were meant for her, there is not a word in them that could do her discredit. Let us be on the watch, and look sharply after the girl, for if he is in love with her, we may be sure he will make more verses, and try to give them to her. Would it not be better to get rid of all this bother by turning him out of doors?" "That is for you to do if you think proper; but really, by your own account, the lad does his work so well that it would go against one's conscience to turn him off upon such slight grounds." "Very well. Let us be on the watch, as you say, and time will tell us what we have to do." Here the conversation ended, and the landlord carried the book back to the place where he had found it. Tomas returned in great anxiety to look for his book, found it, and that it might not occasion him another fright, he immediately copied out the verses, effaced the original, and made up his mind to hazard a declaration to Costanza upon the first opportunity that should present itself. Her extreme reserve, however, was such that there seemed little likelihood of his finding such an opportunity. Besides, the great concourse of people in the house made it almost impossible that he should have any private conversation with her, to the despair of her unfortunate lover. That day, however, it chanced that Costanza appeared with one cheek muffled, and told some one who asked her the reason, that she was suffering from a violent face ache. Tomas, whose wits were sharpened by his passion, instantly saw how he might avail himself of that circumstance. "Señora Costanza," he said, "I will give you a prayer in writing, which you have only to recite once or twice, and it will take away your pain forthwith." "Give it me, if you please," said Costanza, "and I will recite it, for I know how to read." "It must be on condition, however," said Tomas, "that you do not show it to anybody, for I value it highly, and I should not wish it to lose its charm by being made known to many." "I promise you that no person shall see it, but let me have it at once, for I can hardly bear this pain." "I will write it out from memory, and bring it you immediately." This was the very first conversation that had ever taken place between Tomas and Costanza during all the time he had been in the house, which was nearly a month. Tomas withdrew, wrote out the prayer, and found means to deliver it, unseen by any one else, into Costanza's hand, and she, with great eagerness and with no less devotion, went with it into a room where she shut herself up alone. Then opening the paper, she read as follows: "Lady of my soul, I am a gentleman of Burgos, and if I survive my father I shall inherit a property of 6,000 ducats yearly income. Upon the fame of your beauty, which spreads far and wide, I left my native place, changed my dress, and came in the garb in which you see me to serve your master. If you would consent to be mine in the way most accordant with your virtue, put me to any proof you please, to convince you of my truth and sincerity, and when you have fully satisfied yourself in this respect, I will, if you consent, become your husband, and the happiest of men. For the present, I only entreat you not to turn such loving and guileless feelings as mine into the street, for if your master, who has no conception of them, should come to know my aspirations, he would condemn me to exile from your presence, and that would be the same thing as sentencing me to death. Suffer me, señora, to see you until you believe me, considering that he does not deserve the rigorous punishment of being deprived of the sight of you, whose only fault has been that he adored you. You can reply to me with your eyes, unperceived by any of the numbers who are always gazing upon you, for your eyes are such that their anger kills, but their compassion gives new life." When Tomas saw that Costanza had gone away to read his letter, he remained with palpitating heart, fearing and hoping either his death doom or the one look that should bid him live. Presently Costanza returned, looking so beautiful in spite of her muffling, that if any extraneous cause could have heightened her loveliness, it might be supposed that her surprise at finding the contents of the letter so widely different from what she had expected had produced that effect. In her hand she held the paper torn into small pieces, and returning the fragments to Tomas, whose legs could hardly bear him up. "Brother Tomas," she said, "this prayer of yours seems to me to savour more of witchcraft and delusion than of piety. Therefore I do not choose to put faith in it or to use it. I have torn it up that it may not be seen by any one more credulous than myself. Learn other prayers, for it is impossible that this one can ever do you any good." So saying, she returned to her mistress's room, leaving Tomas sorely distressed, but somewhat comforted at finding that his secret remained safe, confined to Costanza's bosom; for as she had not yet divulged it to her master, he reckoned that at least he was in no danger of being turned out of doors. He considered also that in having taken the first step he had overcome mountains of difficulties, for in great and doubtful enterprises the chief difficulty is always in the beginning. End of the Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 2. Section 27 of the Exemplary Novels of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Herndon Bell. The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly. The Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 3. Whilst these things were happening in the posada, Asturiano was going about the market in search of an ass. He examined a great many, but did not find one to his mind, though a gipsy tried hard to force upon him one that moved briskly enough, but more from the effects of some quicksilver which the vendor had put into the animal's ears, than from its natural spirit and nimbleness. But though the pace was good enough, Lope was not satisfied with the size, for he wanted an ass big and strong enough to carry himself and the water vessels, whether they were full or empty. At last a young fellow came up and whispered in his ear, "If you want a beast of the right sort for a water carrier's business, I have one close by in a meadow. A bigger or a better you will not find in Toledo. Take my advice, and never buy a gipsy's beast, for though they may seem sound and good, they are all shams, and full of hidden defects. If you want to buy the real thing, come along with me, and shut your mouth." Lope consented, and away went the pair shoulder to shoulder, till they arrived at the king's gardens, where they found several water carriers seated under the shade of a water wheel, whilst their asses were grazing in an adjoining meadow. The vendor pointed out his ass, which took Lope's fancy immediately, and was praised by all present as a very strong animal, a good goer, and a capital feeder. The bargain was soon struck, and Lope gave 16 ducats for the ass, with all its accoutrements. The bystanders congratulated him on his purchase, and on his entrance into the business, assuring him that he had bought an exceedingly lucky ass, for the man who had sold him had, in less than a year, without overworking himself, made enough to buy 2 suits of clothes, over and above his own keep and that of the ass, and the 16 ducats with which he intended to return to his native place, where a marriage had been arranged with a half kinswoman of his. Besides the water carriers who assisted at the sale of the ass, there was a group of 4 stretched on the ground and playing at primera, the earth serving them for a table, and their cloaks for a tablecloth. Lope went up to watch their game, and saw that they played more like archdeacons than like water carriers, each of them having before him a pile of more than 100 reals in quartos and in silver. Presently 2 of the players, having lost all they had, got up, whereupon the seller of the ass said that if there was a 4th hand he would play, but he did not like a 3-handed game. Lope, who never liked to spoil sport, said that he would make a 4th. They sat down at once and went at it so roundly that in a few moments Lope lost 6 crowns which he had about him, and finding himself without coin, said if they liked to play for the ass he would stake him. The proposal was agreed to, and he staked 1/4 of the ass, saying they should play for him quarter by quarter. His luck was so bad that in 4 consecutive games he lost the 4 quarters of his ass, and they were won by the very man who had sold him. The winner got up to take possession, but Lope stopped him, observing that he had only played for and lost the 4 quarters of his ass, which the winner was welcome to take, but he must leave the tail. This queer demand made all present shout with laughter, and some of them, who were knowing in the law, were of opinion that his claim was unreasonable, for when a sheep or any other beast is sold, the tail is never separated from the carcass, but goes as a matter of course with one of the hind quarters. To this Lope replied that in Barbary they always reckon 5 quarters to a sheep, the tail making the 5th, and being reckoned as valuable as any of the other quarters. He admitted that when a beast was sold alive, and not quartered, that the tail was included in the sale, but this was not the point in question, for he had not sold his ass, but played it away, and it had never been his intention to stake the tail. Therefore he required them forthwith to give him up the same, with everything thereto annexed, or pertaining, that is to say, the whole series of spinal bones, from the back of the skull to where they ended in the tail, and to the tips of the lowest hairs thereof. "Well," said one, "suppose it be as you say, and that your claim is allowed. Leave the tail sticking to the rest of the ass, and hold on by it." "No," said Lope, "give me up the tail, or all the water carriers in the world shall never make me give up the ass. Don't imagine, because there are so many of you, that I will let you put any cheating tricks on me, for I am a man who can stand up to another man, and put 2 handbreadths of cold steel into his guts, without his being able to tell how he came by them. Moreover, I won't be paid in money for the tail at so much a pound, for I will have it in substance, and cut off from the ass, as I have said." The winner of the 4 quarters and the rest of the company began to think that it would not be advisable to resort to force in this business, for Lope seemed to them to be a man of such mettle that he would not be vanquished without some trouble. Nor were they mistaken, for as became a man who had spent 3 seasons at the tunny fisheries, where all sorts of rows and brawls were familiar things, he rattled out a few of the most out of the way oaths in vogue there, threw his cap into the air, whipped out a knife from beneath his cloak, and put himself into such a posture as struck the whole company with awe and respect. At last, one of them, who seemed the most rational, induced the rest to agree that Lope should be allowed to stake the tail against a quarter of the ass at a game of quinola. So said, so done. Lope won the first game. The loser was piqued and staked another quarter, which went the way of the first, and in 2 more games the whole ass was gone. He then proposed to play for money. Lope was unwilling, but was so importuned on all hands that at last he consented, and such was his run of luck that he left his opponent without a maravedi. So intense was the loser's vexation that he rolled and writhed upon the ground, and knocked his head against it. Lope, however, like a good-natured liberal gentleman, raised him up, returned all the money he had won, including the 16 ducats, the price of the ass, and even divided what he had left among the bystanders. Great was the surprise of them all at this extraordinary liberality, and had they lived in the time of the great Tamerlane, they would have made him king of the water carriers. Accompanied by a great retinue, Lope returned to the city, where he related his adventures to Tomas, who in turn recounted to him his own partial success. There was no tavern or eating house or rogues' gathering in which the play for the ass was not known, the dispute about the tail, and the high spirit and liberality of the Asturian. But as the mob are for the most part unjust, and more prone to evil than to good, they thought nothing of the generosity and high mettle of the great Lope, but only of the tail, and he had scarcely been 2 days carrying water about the city before he found himself pointed at by people who cried, "There goes the man of the tail!" The boys caught up the cry, and no sooner had Lope shown himself in any street that it rang from one end of the other with shouts of "Asturiano, give up the tail! Give up the tail, Asturiano!" At first Lope said not a word, thinking that his silence would tire out his persecutors, but in this he was mistaken, for the more he held his tongue, the more the boys wagged theirs, till at last he lost patience, and getting off his ass, began to drub the boys. But this was only cutting off the heads of Hydra, and for every one he laid low by thrashing some boy, there sprang up on the instant, not 7, but 700 more, that began to pester him more and more for the tail. At last he found it expedient to retire to the lodgings he had taken apart from his companion in order to avoid Argüello, and to keep close there until the influence of the malignant planet which then ruled the hours should have passed away, and the boys should have forgotten to ask him for the tail. For 2 days he never left the house, except by night to go and see Tomas, and ask him how he got on. Tomas told him that since he had given the paper to Costanza, he had never been able to speak a single word to her, and that she seemed to be more reserved than ever. Once he had found, as he thought, an opportunity to accost her, but before he could get out a word, she stopped him, saying, "Tomas, I am in no pain now, and therefore have no need of your words or your prayers. Be content that I do not accuse you to the Inquisition, and give yourself no further trouble." But she made this declaration without any expression of anger in her countenance. Lope then related how the boys annoyed him, calling after him for the tail, and Tomas advised him not to go abroad, at least with his ass, or if he did that, he should choose only the least frequented streets. If that was not enough, he had an unfailing remedy left, which was to get rid of his business, and with it of the uncivil demand to which it subjected him. Lope asked him had the Gallegan come again to his room. He said she had not, but that she persisted in trying to ingratiate herself with him by means of dainties which she purloined out of what she cooked for the guests. After this conversation Lope went back to his lodgings, intending not to leave them again for another 6 days, at least in the company of his ass. It might be about 11 at night when the corregidor most unexpectedly entered the posada del Sevillano, at the head of a formidable posse. The host and even the guest were startled and agitated by his visit; for as comets, when they appear, always excite fears of disaster, just so the ministers of justice, when they suddenly enter a house, strike even guiltless consciences with alarm. The unwelcome visitor walked into a room and called for the master of the house, who came tremblingly to know what might be the señor corregidor's pleasure. "Are you the landlord?" said the magistrate with great gravity. "Yes, señor, and your worship's humble servant to command," was the reply. The corregidor then ordered that every one else should quit the room, and leave him alone with the landlord. This being done, he resumed his questions. "What servants have you in your inn, landlord?" "Señor, I have 2 Gallegan wenches, a housekeeper, and a young man who gives out the oats and straw and keeps the reckoning." "No more?" "No, señor." "Then tell me, landlord, what is become of a girl who is said to be a servant in this house, and so beautiful that she is known all over this city as the illustrious Scullery-Maid? It has even reached my ears that my son Don Periquito is in love with her, and that not a night passes in which he does not serenade her. Señor, it is true that this illustrious Scullery-Maid, as they call her, is in my house, but she neither is my servant nor ceases to be so. I do not understand you. What do you mean by saying that she is and is not your servant?" "It is the real truth, and if your worship will allow me, I will explain the matter to you, and tell you what I have never told to any one." "Before I hear what you have to say, I must first see this Scullery-Maid." Upon this the landlord went to the door, and called to his wife to send in Costanza. When the landlady heard that, she was in great dismay, and began to wring her hands, saying, "Lord have mercy on me! What can the corregidor want with Costanza, and alone? Some terrible calamity must surely have happened, for this girl's beauty bewitches the men." "Don't be alarmed, señora," said Costanza. "I will go and see what the señor corregidor wants, and if anything bad has happened, be assured the fault is not mine." And without waiting to be called a second time, she took a lighted candle in a silver candlestick, and went into the room where the corregidor was. As soon as he saw her, he bade the landlord shut the door, and then taking the candle out of her hand, and holding it near her face, he stood gazing at her from head to foot. The blush which this called up into Costanza's cheeks made her look so beautiful and so modest that it seemed to the corregidor he beheld an angel descended on earth. After a long scrutiny, "Landlord," he said, "an inn is not fit setting for a jewel like this, and I now declare that my son Don Periquito has shown his good sense in fixing his affections so worthily. I say, damsel, that they may well call you not only illustrious, but most illustrious, but it should not be with the addition of Scullery-Maid, but with that of Duchess." "She is no scullery-maid, señor," said the host. "Her only service in the house is to keep the keys of the plate, of which by God's bounty I have some quantity for the service of the honourable guests who come to this inn." "Be that as it may, landlord," returned the corregidor, "I say it is neither seemly nor proper that this damsel should live in an inn. Is she a relation of yours?" "She is neither my relation nor my servant, and if your worship would like to know who she is, your worship shall hear, when she is not present, things that will both please and surprise you." "I should like to know it." "Let Costanza retire, and be assured she may count on me in all things, as she would upon her own father, for her great modesty and beauty oblige all who see her to offer themselves for her service." Costanza replied not a word, but with great composure made a profound reverence to the corregidor. On leaving the room she found her mistress waiting in great agitation. She told her all that had passed, and how her master remained with the corregidor to tell some things, she knew not what, which he did not choose her to hear. All this did not quite tranquillise the landlady, nor did she entirely recover her equanimity until the corregidor went away, and she saw her husband safe and free. The latter meanwhile had told the corregidor the following tale: "It is now, by my reckoning, señor, 15 years, 1 month, and 4 days, since there came to this house a lady dressed in the habit of a pilgrim, and carried in a litter. She was attended by 4 servant men on horseback, and 2 dueñas and a damsel who rode in a coach. She had also 2 sumpter mules, richly caparisoned, and carrying a fine bed and all the necessary implements for cooking. In short, the whole equipage was first rate, and the pilgrim had all the appearance of being some great lady; and though she seemed to be about 40 years of age, she was nevertheless beautiful in the extreme. She was in bad health, looked pale, and was so weary that she ordered her bed to be instantly made, and her servants made it in this very room. They asked me who was the most famous physician in this city. I said Doctor de la Fuente. They went for him instantly. He came without delay, saw his patient alone, and the result was that he ordered the bed to be made in some other part of the house, where the lady might not be disturbed by any noise, which was immediately done. None of the men servants entered the lady's apartment, but only the two dueñas and the damsel. My wife and I asked the men servants who was this lady, what was her name, whence she came, and whither she was going. Was she wife, widow, or maid, and why she wore that pilgrim's dress? To all these questions, which we repeated many and many a time, we got no other answer than that this pilgrim was a noble and wealthy lady of old Castile, that she was a widow and had no children to inherit her wealth, and that having been for some months ill of the dropsy, she had made a vow to go on a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that was the reason for the dress she wore. As for her name, they were under orders to call her nothing but the Lady Pilgrim. So much we learned then, but 3 days after one of the dueñas called myself and my wife into the lady's presence, and there, with the door locked and before her women, she addressed us with tears in her eyes, I believe in these very words: "Heaven is my witness, friends, that without any fault of mine I find myself in the cruel predicament which I shall now declare to you. I am pregnant, and so near my time that I already feel the pangs of travail. None of my men servants are aware of my misfortune, but from my women here I have neither been able nor desirous to conceal it. To escape prying eyes in my own neighbourhood, and that this hour might not come upon me there, I made a vow to go to Our Lady of Guadalupe, but it is plainly her will that my labour should befall me in your house. It is now for you to succour and aid me with the secrecy due to one who commits her honour to your hands. In this purse there are 200 gold crowns, which I present to you as a first proof how grateful I shall be for the good offices I am sure you will render me." And taking from under her pillow a green silk purse embroidered with gold, she put it into the hands of my wife, who like a simpleton stood gaping at the lady, and did not say so much as a word in the way of thanks or acknowledgment. For my part, I remember that I said that there was no need at all of that. We were not persons to be moved more by interest than by humanity to do a good deed when the occasion offered. The lady then continued: "You must immediately, my friends, look out for some place to which you may convey my child as soon as it is born, and also you must contrive some story to tell the person in whose charge you will leave it. At first I wish the babe to remain in the city, and afterwards to be taken to a village. As for what is subsequently done, I will give you instructions on my return from Guadalupe, if it is God's will that I should live to complete my pilgrimage, for in the meantime I shall have had leisure to consider what may be my best course. I shall have no need of a midwife, for as I know from other confinements of mine more honourable than this, I shall do well enough with the aid of my women only, and thus I shall avoid having an additional witness to my misfortune." Here the poor distressed pilgrim ended what she had to say, and broke out into a flood of tears, but was partly composed by the soothing words spoken to her by my wife, who had recovered her wits. I immediately went in search of a woman to whom I might take the child when it was born, and between 12 and 1 o'clock that night, when all the people in the house were fast asleep, the lady was delivered of the most beautiful little girl that eyes ever beheld, and the very same that your worship has just seen. But the wonder was, that neither did the mother make any moan in her labour, nor did the baby cry, but all passed off quietly, and in all the silence that became this extraordinary case. The lady kept her bed for 6 days, during which the doctor was constant in his visits. Not that she had informed him of the cause of her illness, or that she took any of the medicines he prescribed, but she thought to blind her men servants by his visits, as she afterwards informed me when she was out of danger. On the 8th day she left her bed, apparently as big as she had been before her delivery, continued her pilgrimage, and returned in 3 weeks, looking almost quite well, for she had gradually reduced the bulk of her artificial dropsy. The little girl had been christened Costanza, in accordance with the order given me by her mother, and was already placed with a nurse in a village about 2 leagues hence, where she passed for my niece. The lady was pleased to express her satisfaction with all I had done, and gave me, when she was going away, a gold chain, which is now in my possession, from which she took off 6 links, telling me that they would be brought by the person who should come to claim the child. She also took a piece of white parchment, wrote upon it, and then cut zigzag through what she had written. Look, sir, here are my hands locked together with the fingers interwoven. Now suppose your honour were to write across my fingers. It is easy to imagine that one could read the writing whilst the fingers were joined, but that the meaning would be lost as soon as the hands were separated, and would appear again as soon as they were united as before. Just so with the parchment. One half serves as a key to the other. When they are put together, the letters make sense, but separately they have no meaning. One half of the parchment and the whole chain, short of the 6 links, were left with me, and I keep them still, always expecting the arrival of the person who is to produce the counterparts. For the lady told me that in 2 years she would send for her daughter, charging me that I should have her brought up, not as became her mother's quality, but as a simple villager, and if by any chance she were not able to send for the child so soon, I was on no account to acquaint her with the secret of her birth, even should she have arrived at years of discretion. The lady moreover begged me to excuse her if she did not tell me who she was, having for the present important reasons to conceal her name. Finally, after giving us 400 gold crowns more, and embracing my wife with tears, she departed, leaving us filled with admiration for her discretion, worth, beauty, and modesty. Costanza remained at nurse in the village for 2 years. At the end of that time I brought her home, and have kept her ever since constantly with me, in the dress of a girl who had to work for her bread, as her mother had directed. 15 years, 1 month, and 4 days I have been looking for the person who should come and claim her, but the length of time that has elapsed makes me begin to lose all hope of his coming. If he does not make his appearance before this year is out, it is my determination to adopt her and bequeath her all I am worth, which is upwards of 16,000 ducats, thanks be to God. It now remains for me, Señor Corregidor, to enumerate to you the virtues and good qualities of Costanza, if it be possible for me to express them. First and foremost, she is most piously devoted to Our Lady. She confesses and communicates every month. She can read and write. There's not a better lace maker in all Toledo. She sings without accompaniment like an angel. In the manner of behaving with propriety she has not her equal. As for her beauty, your worship has seen it with your own eyes. Señor Don Pedro, your worship's son, has never exchanged a word with her in her life. It is true that from time to time he treats her to some music which she never listens to. Many señors, and men of title too, have put up at this house, and have delayed their journey for several days, solely to have their fill of looking at her. But I well know there is not one of them can boast with truth that she ever gave them opportunity to say one word to her, either alone or before folk. This, señor, is the real history of the illustrious Scullery-Maid, who is no scullion, in which I have not departed one tittle from the truth." The host had long ended his narrative before the corregidor broke silence, so much was he struck by the strange facts he had heard. At last he desired to see the parchment and the chain. The host produced them without delay, and they corresponded exactly to the description he had given of them. The chain was of curious workmanship, and on the parchment were written, one under the other, on the projecting portions of the zigzag, the letters T I I T E R E O E, which manifestly required to be joined with those of the counterpart to make sense. The corregidor admired the ingenuity of the contrivance, and judged from the costliness of the chain that the pilgrim must have been a lady of great wealth. It was his intention to remove the lovely girl from the inn as soon as he had chosen a suitable convent for her abode, but for the present he contented himself with taking away the parchment only, desiring the innkeeper to inform him if any one came for Costanza before he showed the person the chain which he left in his custody. And with this parting injunction the corregidor left the house, much marvelling at what he had seen and heard. End of the Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 3. Section 28 of the Exemplary Novels of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Herndon Bell. The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly. The Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 4. Whilst all this affair was going on, Tomas was almost beside himself with agitation and alarm, and lost in 1,000 conjectures, each one of which he dismissed as improbable the moment it was formed. But when he saw the corregidor go away, leaving Costanza behind him, his spirits revived, and he began to recover his self-possession. He did not venture to question the landlord, nor did the latter say a word about what had passed between him and the corregidor to anybody but his wife, who was greatly relieved thereby, and thanked God for her delivery out of a terrible fright. About 1 o'clock on the following day there came to the inn 2 elderly cavaliers of venerable presence, attended by 4 servants on horseback and 2 on foot. Having inquired if that was the Posada del Sevillano, and being answered in the affirmative, they entered the gateway, and the 4 mounted servants, dismounting, first helped their masters out of their saddles. Costanza came out to meet the newcomers with her wonted propriety of demeanour, and no sooner had one of the cavaliers set eyes on her than, turning to his companion, he said, "I believe, Señor Don Juan, we have already found the very thing we are come in quest of." Tomas, who had come as usual to take charge of the horses and mules, instantly recognised 2 of his father's servants. A moment after he saw his father himself, and found that his companion was no other than the father of Carriazo. He instantly conjectured that they were both on their way to the tunny fisheries to look for himself and his friend, some one having no doubt told them that it was there and not in Flanders they would find their sons. Not daring to appear before his father in the garb he wore, he made a bold venture, passed by the party with his hand before his face, and went to look for Costanza, whom by great good luck he found alone. Then hurriedly, and with a tremulous voice, dreading lest she would not give him time to say a word to her, "Costanza," he said, "one of those 2 elderly cavaliers is my father, that one whom you will hear called Don Juan de Avendaño. Inquire of his servants if he has a son, Don Tomas de Avendaño by name, and that is myself. Thence you may go on to make such other inquiries as will satisfy you that I have told you the truth respecting my quality, and that I will keep my word with regard to every offer I have made you. And now farewell, for I will not return to this house until they have left it." Costanza made him no reply, nor did he wait for any, but hurrying out, with his face concealed as he had come in, he went to acquaint Carriazo that their fathers had arrived at the Sevillano. The landlord called for Tomas to give out oats, but no Tomas appearing, he had to do it himself. Meanwhile, one of the 2 cavaliers called one of the Gallegan wenches aside, and asked her what was the name of the beautiful girl he had seen, and was she a relation of the landlord or the landlady. "The girl's name is Costanza," replied the Gallegan. "She is no relation either to the landlord or the landlady, nor do I know what she is. All I can say is, I wish the murrain had her, for I don't know what there is about her that she does not leave one of us girls in the house a single chance. For all we have our own features too, such as God made them. Nobody enters these doors but the first thing he does is to ask, 'Who is that beautiful girl?' and the next is to say all sorts of flattering things of her, while nobody condescends to say a word to the rest of us, not so much as, 'What are you doing here, devils, or women, or whatever you are?'" "From your account, then," said the gentleman, "I suppose she has a fine time of it with the strangers who put up at this house." "You think so? Well, just you hold her foot for the shoeing, and see how you'll like the job. By the Lord, señor, if she would only give her admirers leave to look at her, she might roll in gold; but she's more touch me not than a hedgehog. She's a devourer of Ave Marias, and spends the whole day at her needle and her prayers. I wish I was as sure of a good legacy as she is of working miracles some day. Bless you, she's a downright saint. My mistress says she wears haircloth next her skin." Highly delighted with what he had heard from the Gallegan, the gentleman did not wait till they had taken off his spurs, but called for the landlord, and withdrew with him into a private room. "Señor host," said he, "I am come to redeem a pledge of mine that has been in your hands for some years, and I bring you for it 1,000 gold crowns, these links of a chain, and this parchment." The host instantly recognized the links and the parchment, and, highly delighted with the promise of the 1,000 crowns, replied, "Señor, the pledge you wish to redeem is in this house, but not the chain or the parchment, which is to prove the truth of your claim. I pray you therefore to have patience, and I will return immediately." So saying, he ran off to inform the corregidor of what was happening. The corregidor, who had just done dinner, mounted his horse without delay, and rode to the Posada del Sevillano, taking with him the tally parchment. No sooner had he entered the room where the two cavaliers sat, than hastening with open arms to embrace one of them, "Bless my soul, my good cousin Don Juan de Avendaño, this is indeed a welcome surprise." "I am delighted to see you, my good cousin," said Don Juan, "and to find you as well as I always wish you. Embrace this gentleman, cousin. This is Don Diego de Carriazo, a great señor and my friend." "I am already acquainted with the Señor Don Diego," replied the corregidor, "and am his most obedient servant." After a further interchange of civilities, they passed into another room, where they remained alone with the innkeeper, who said, as he produced the chain, "The señor corregidor knows what you are come for, Don Diego de Carriazo. Be pleased to produce the links that are wanting to this chain. His worship will show the parchment which he holds, and let us come to the proof for which I have been so long waiting." "It appears, then," said Don Diego, "that it will not be necessary to explain to the señor corregidor the reason of our coming, since you have done so already, señor landlord." "He told me something," said the corregidor, "but he has left much untold which I long to know. Here is the parchment." Don Diego produced that which he had brought. The two were put together, and found to fit accurately into each other, and between every two letters of the innkeeper's portion, which, as we have said, were TIITEREOE, there now appeared one of the following series: HSSH the whole making together the words, "This is the true token." The 6 links of the chain brought by Don Diego were then compared with the larger fragment, and found to correspond exactly. "So far all is clear," said the corregidor. "It now remains for us to discover, if it be possible, who are the parents of this very beautiful lady." "Her father," said Don Diego, "you see in me. Her mother is not living, and you must be content with knowing that she was a lady of such rank that I might have been her servant. But though I conceal her name, I would not have you suppose that she was in any wise culpable, however manifest and avowed her fault may appear to have been. The story I will now briefly relate to you will completely exonerate her memory. You must know then that Costanza's mother, being left a widow by a man of high rank, retired to an estate of hers, where she lived a calm sequestered life, among her servants and vassals. It chanced one day, when I was hunting, that I found myself very near her house, and determined to pay her a visit. It was siesta time when I arrived at her palace, for I can call it nothing else. Giving my horse to one of my servants, I entered, and saw no one till I was in the very room in which she lay asleep on a black ottoman. She was extremely handsome. The silence, the loneliness of the place, and the opportunity, awakened my guilty desires, and without pausing to reflect, I locked the door, woke her, and holding her firmly in my grasp, said, "No cries, señora. They would only serve to proclaim your dishonour. No one has seen me enter this room, for by good fortune all your servants are fast asleep, and should your cries bring them hither, they can do no more than kill me in your very arms. And if they do, your reputation will not be the less blighted for all that." In fine, I effected my purpose against her will and by main force, and left her so stupefied by the calamity that had befallen her, that she either could not or would not utter one word to me. Quitting the place as I had entered it, I rode to the house of one of my friends, who resided within 2 leagues of my victim's abode. The lady subsequently removed to another residence, and 2 years passed without my seeing her, or making any attempt to do so. At the end of that time I heard that she was dead. About 3 weeks since, I received a letter from a man who had been the deceased lady's steward, earnestly entreating me to come to him, as he had something to communicate to me which deeply concerned my happiness and honour. I went to him, very far from dreaming of any such thing as I was about to hear from him, and found him at the point of death. He told me in brief terms that his lady on her deathbed had made known to him what had happened between her and me, how she had become pregnant, had made a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Guadalupe to conceal her misfortune, and had been delivered in this inn of a daughter named Costanza. The man gave me the tokens upon which she was to be delivered to me, namely, the piece of chain and the parchment, and with them 30,000 gold crowns, which the lady had left as a marriage portion for her daughter. At the same time he told me that it was the temptation to appropriate that money which had so long prevented him from obeying the dying behest of his mistress, but now that he was about to be called to the great account, he was eager to relieve his conscience by giving me up the money, and putting me in the way to find my daughter. Returning home with the money and the tokens, I related the whole story to Don Juan de Avendaño, and he has been kind enough to accompany me to this city. Don Diego had but just finished his narrative, when some one was heard shouting at the street door, "Tell Tomas Pedro the hostler that they are taking his friend the Asturiano to prison." On hearing this, the corregidor immediately sent orders to the alguazil to bring in his prisoner, which was forthwith done. In came the Asturian with his mouth all bloody. He had evidently been very roughly handled, and was held with no tender grasp by the alguazil. The moment he entered the room he was thunderstruck at beholding his own father and Avendaño's, and to escape recognition he covered his face with a handkerchief, under pretence of wiping away the blood. The corregidor inquired what that young man had done who appeared to have been so roughly handled. The alguazil replied that he was a water carrier, known by the name of the Asturian, and the boys in the street used to shout after him, "Give up the tail, Asturiano, give up the tail." The alguazil then related the story out of which that cry had grown, whereat all present laughed not a little. The alguazil further stated that as the Asturian was going out at the Puerta de Alcantara, the boys who followed him having redoubled their cries about the tail, he dismounted from his ass, laid about them all, and left one of them half dead with the beating he had given him. Thereupon the officer proceeded to arrest him. He resisted, and that was how he came to be in the state in which he then appeared. The corregidor ordered the prisoner to uncover his face, but as he delayed to do so, the alguazil snatched away the handkerchief. "My son, Don Diego!" cried the astonished father. "What is the meaning of all this? How came you in that dress?" "What! You have not yet left off your scampish tricks." Carriazo fell on his knees before his father, who with tears in his eyes held him long in his embrace. Don Juan de Avendaño, knowing that his son had accompanied Carriazo, asked the latter where he was, and received for answer the news that Don Tomas de Avendaño was the person who gave out the oats and straw in that inn. This new revelation, made by the Asturiano, put the climax to the surprises of the day. The corregidor desired the innkeeper to bring in his hostler. "I believe he is not in the house, but I will go look for him," said he, and he left the room for that purpose. Don Diego asked Carriazo what was the meaning of these metamorphoses, and what had induced him to turn water carrier and Don Tomas hostler. Carriazo replied that he could not answer these questions in public, but he would do so in private. Meanwhile Tomas Pedro lay hid in his room, in order to see thence, without being himself seen, what his father and Carriazo's were doing. But he was in great perplexity about the arrival of the corregidor, and the general commotion in the inn. At last, some one having told the landlord where he was hidden, he went and tried half by fair means and half by force to bring him down. But he would not have succeeded had not the corregidor himself gone out into the yard and called him by his own name, saying, "Come down, señor kinsman, you will find neither bears nor lions in your way." Tomas then left his hiding place, and went and knelt with downcast eyes and great submission at the feet of his father, who embraced him with a joy surpassing that of the prodigal's father when the son who had been lost was found again. The corregidor sent for Costanza, and taking her by the hand, presented her to her father, saying, "Receive, Señor Don Diego, this treasure, and esteem it the richest you could desire. And you, beautiful maiden, kiss your father's hand, and give thanks to heaven which has so happily exalted your low estate." Costanza, who till that moment had not even guessed at what was occurring, could only fall at her father's feet, all trembling with emotion, clasp his hands in hers, and cover them with kisses and tears. Meanwhile the corregidor had been urgent with his cousin Don Juan that the whole party should come with him to his house, and though Don Juan would have declined the invitation, the corregidor was so pressing that he carried his point, and the whole party got into his coach, which he had previously sent for. But when the corregidor bade Costanza take her place in it, her heart sank within her, she threw herself into the landlady's arms, and wept so piteously that the hearts of all the beholders were moved. "What is this, daughter of my soul?" said the hostess. "Going to leave me? Can you part from her who has reared you with the love of a mother?" Costanza was no less averse to the separation, but the tender-hearted corregidor declared that the hostess also should enter the coach, and that she should not be parted from her whom she regarded as a daughter, as long as she remained in Toledo. So the whole party, including the hostess, set out together for the corregidor's house, where they were well received by his noble lady. After they had enjoyed a sumptuous repast, Carriazo related to his father how for love of Costanza Don Tomas had taken service as hostler in the inn, and how his devotion to her was such that, before he knew her to be a lady and the daughter of a man of such quality, he would gladly have married her even as a scullery-maid. The wife of the corregidor immediately made Costanza put on clothes belonging to a daughter of hers of the same age and figure, and if she had been beautiful in the dress of a working girl, she seemed heavenly in that of a lady, and she wore it with such ease and grace that one would have supposed she had never been used to any other kind of costume from her birth. But among so many who rejoiced, there was one person who was full of sadness, and that was Don Pedro, the corregidor's son, who at once concluded that Costanza was not to be his. Nor was he mistaken, for it was arranged between the corregidor, Don Diego de Carriazo, and Don Juan de Avendaño, that Don Tomas would marry Costanza, her father bestowing upon her the 30,000 crowns left by her mother, and the water carrier Don Diego de Carriazo should marry the daughter of the corregidor, and that Don Pedro, the corregidor's son, should receive the hand of Don Juan de Avendaño's daughter, his father undertaking to obtain a dispensation with regard to their relationship. In this manner all were finally made happy. The news of the 3 marriages, and the singular fortune of the illustrious scullery-maid, spread through the city, and multitudes flocked to see Costanza in her new garb as a lady, which became her so well. These persons saw the hostler Tomas Pedro changed into Don Tomas de Avendaño, and dressed as a man of quality. They observed, too, that Lope Asturiano looked very much the gentleman, since he had changed his costume, and dismissed the ass and the water vessels. Nevertheless, there were not wanting some who, as he passed through the streets in all his pomp, still called out to him for the tale. After remaining a month in Toledo, most of the party went to Burgos, namely Don Diego de Carriazo, his wife, and his father, Costanza and her husband, Don Tomas, and the corregidor's son, who desired to visit his kinswoman and destined bride. The host was enriched by the present of the 1,000 crowns, and by the many jewels which Costanza bestowed upon her señora, as she persisted in calling her, who had brought her up. The story of the illustrious scullery-maid afforded the poets of the Golden Tagus a theme on which to exercise their pens in celebrating the incomparable beauty of Costanza, who still lives happily with her faithful hostler. Carriazo has 3 sons, who, without inheriting their father's tastes, are caring to know whether or not there are any such things as tunny fisheries in the world, or all pursuing their studies at Salamanca. Well, their father never sees a water-carrier's ass, but he thinks of the one he drove in Toledo, and is not without apprehension that when he least expects it, his ears shall be saluted with some squib having for its burden, "Give us the tale, Asturiano! Asturiano, give us the tale!" End of the Illustrious Scullery-Maid, Part 4.
Section 29 of the Exemplary Novels of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Gonzalez. The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly. The Two Damsels, Part 1. 5 leagues from the city of Seville there is a town called Castelblanco. At one of the many inns belonging to that town there arrived at nightfall a traveller, mounted on a handsome nag of foreign breed. He had no servant with him, and, without waiting for any one to hold his stirrup, he threw himself nimbly from the saddle. The host, who was a thrifty, active man, quickly presented himself, but not until the traveller had already seated himself on a bench under the gateway, where the host found him hastily unbuttoning his breast, after which he let his arms drop and fainted. The hostess, who was a good-natured soul, made haste to sprinkle his face with cold water, and presently he revived. Evidently ashamed of having been seen in such a state, he buttoned himself up again, and asked for a room to which he might retire and, if possible, be alone. The hostess said they had only one in the house, and that had 2 beds, in one of which she must accommodate any other guest that might arrive. The traveller replied that he would pay for both beds, guest or no guest, and taking out a gold crown, he gave it to the hostess, on condition that no one should have the vacant bed. The hostess, well satisfied with such good payment, promised that she would do as he required, though the Dean of Seville himself should arrive that night at her house. She then asked him if he would sup. He declined, and only begged they would take great care of his nag. Then, taking the key of the chamber, and carrying with him a large pair of leathern saddle-bags, he went in, locked the door, and even, as it afterwards appeared, barricaded it with 2 chairs. The moment he was gone, the host, the hostess, the hostler, and 2 neighbours who chanced to be there, held a council together, and all extolled the great comeliness and graceful deportment of the stranger, agreeing that they had never seen any one so handsome. They discussed his age, and came to the conclusion that it was between 16 and 17. They speculated largely as to what might have been the cause of his fainting, but could make no plausible guess at it. The neighbors after a while went home, the host went to look after the nag, and the hostess to prepare supper in case any other guest should arrive. Nor was it long before another entered, not much older than the first, and of no less engaging mien, so that the hostess no sooner saw him than she exclaimed, "God bless me, how is this? Are angels coming to stop here to-night?" "Why does the lady hostess say that?" said the cavalier. "It is not for nothing I say it. Only I must beg your honour not to dismount, for I have no bed to give you. For the two I had have been taken by a cavalier who has paid for both, though he has no need of more than one. But he does that because no one else may enter the room, being, I suppose, fond of solitude, though upon my conscience I can't tell why, for his face and appearance are not such that he need be ashamed of them, or want to hide them, but quite the contrary." "Is he so good-looking, señora hostess?" "Good-looking? Ay, the best of good-looking." "Here, my man, hold my stirrup," said the cavalier to a muleteer who accompanied him, "for though I have to sleep on the floor, I must see a man of whom I hear such high encomiums." And then, dismounting, he called for supper, which was immediately placed before him. Presently an alguazil dropped in, as they commonly do at the inns in small towns, and taking a seat entered into conversation with the cavalier while he supped, not forgetting at intervals to swallow 3 large glasses of wine, and the breast and leg of a partridge which the cavalier gave him. He paid his scot meanwhile by asking news of the capital, of the wars in Flanders, and the decay of the Turk, not forgetting the exploits of the Transylvanian, whom God preserve. The cavalier supped and said nothing, not having come from a place which would have supplied him with the means of satisfying these inquiries. By and by, the innkeeper, having seen to the nag, came in and sat down to make a third in the conversation, and to taste his own wine no less copiously than the alguazil, and at every gulp he leaned his head back over his left shoulder and praised the wine, which he exalted to the clouds, though he did not leave much of it there, for fear it should get watered. From one subject to another, the host fell at last upon the praises of the first comer, told how he had fainted, how he had gone to bed without supper, and had locked himself in, and spoke of his well-filled saddle-bags, the goodness of his nag, and the handsome travelling dress he wore, all of which made it strange that he travelled without any attendant. The cavalier felt his curiosity piqued anew, and asked the landlord to contrive that he might sleep in the second bed, for which he would give him a gold crown. The landlord's fingers itched to take the money, but he said the thing was impossible, for the door was locked inside, and he durst not wake the sleeper, who had paid so well for both the beds. The alguazil, however, got over the difficulty. "I'll tell you what is to be done," said he. "I will knock at the door, and say that I am an officer of justice, that I have orders from the señor alcalde to see this cavalier accommodated in this inn, and that there is no other bed, he must have one of those 2. The landlord will cry out against this, and say it is not fair, for the second bed is already engaged and paid for, and so he will clear himself of all responsibility, while your honour will attain your object." This scheme of the alguazil's was unanimously approved, and the cavalier rewarded him for it with 4 reals. It was carried into effect at once. The first guest was compelled with manifest reluctance to open the door. The second entered the room with many apologies for the intrusion, to which the first made no reply, nor did he even show his face, for instantly hastening back into bed, he turned to the wall and pretended to be asleep. The last comer also went to bed, hoping to have his curiosity satisfied in the morning, when they both got up. The night was one of the long and weary ones of December, when the cold and the fatigues of the day should naturally have disposed the 2 travellers to sleep, but they had not that effect on the first of the pair, who not long after midnight began to sigh and moan as if his heart would break. His lamentations awoke the occupant of the other bed, who distinctly overheard the following soliloquy, though uttered in a faint and tremulous voice, broken by sighs and sobs. "Wretch that I am! Whither is the irresistible force of my destiny hurrying me? What a path is mine! And what issue can I hope for out of the labyrinth in which I am entangled? O my youth and inexperience, honor disregarded, love ungratefully repaid, regard for honored parents and kindred trampled under foot! Woe is me 1,000 times to have thus given the reins to my inclinations! O false words, which I have too trustingly responded to by deeds! But of whom do I complain? Did I not wilfully betray myself? Did not my own hands wield the knife that cut down my reputation, and destroyed the trust which my parents reposed in my rectitude? O perjured Marco Antonio! Is it possible that your honeyed words concealed so much of the gall of unkindness and disdain? Where art thou, ingrate? Whither hast thou fled, unthankful man? Answer her who calls upon thee. Wait for her who pursues thee. Sustain me, for I droop. Pay me what thou owest me. Succor me, since thou art in so many ways bound to me." Here the sorrowing stranger relapsed into silence, broken only by sobs. The other, who had been listening attentively, inferred from what he had heard that the speaker was a woman. The curiosity he had before felt was now excited to the highest degree. He was several times on the point of approaching the lady's bed, and he would have done so at last, but just then he heard her open the door, call to the landlord, and bid him saddle the nag, for she wanted to go. It was a pretty long time before she could make the landlord hear her, and finally all the answer she could obtain was a recommendation to go to sleep again, for there was more than half the night yet to come, and it was so dark that it would be a very rash thing to venture upon the road. Upon this she said no more, but shut the door and went back to bed, sighing dismally. The other stranger now thought it would be well to address her, and offer her his aid in any way that might be serviceable, as a means of inducing her to say who she was, and relate her piteous story. "Assuredly, Señor Gentleman," said he, "I should think myself destitute of natural feeling, nay, that I had a heart of stone and a bosom of brass, if your sighs and the words you have uttered did not move me to sympathy. If the compassion I feel for you and the earnest desire I have conceived to risk my life for your relief, if your misfortunes admit of any, may give me some claim upon your courtesy, I entreat you to manifest it in declaring to me the cause of your grief without reserve." "If that grief had not deprived me of understanding," said the person addressed, "I ought to have remembered that I was not alone in this room, and have bridled my tongue and suppressed my sighs. But to punish myself for my imprudent forgetfulness, I will do what you ask. For it may be that the pangs it will cost me to relate the bitter story of my misfortunes will end at once my life and my woes. But first you must promise me solemnly that whatever I may reveal, you will not quit your bed nor come to mine, nor ask more of me than I choose to disclose, for if you do, the very moment I hear you move, I will run myself through with my sword, which lies ready to my hand." The cavalier, who would have promised anything to obtain the information he so much desired, vowed that he would not depart a jot from the conditions so courteously imposed. "On that assurance, then," said the lady, "I will do what I have never done before, and relate to you the history of my life. Hearken, then. You must know, señor, that although I entered this inn, as they have doubtless told you, in the dress of a man, I am an unhappy maiden. or at least I was not 8 days ago, and ceased to be so, because I had the folly to believe the delusive words of a perjured man. My name is Theodosia. My birthplace is one of the chief towns of the province of Andalusia, the name of which I suppress, because it does not import you so much to know it as me to conceal it. My parents, who are noble and wealthy, had a son and a daughter, the one for their joy and honor, the other for the reverse. They sent my brother to study at Salamanca, and me they kept at home, where they brought me up with all the scrupulous care becoming their own virtue and nobility, whilst on my part I always rendered them the most cheerful obedience, and punctually conformed to all their wishes, until my unhappy fate set before my eyes the son of a neighbor of ours, wealthier than my parents, and no less noble than they. The first time I saw him, I felt nothing more than the pleasure one feels at making an agreeable acquaintance, and this I might well feel, for his person, air, manners, disposition, and understanding were the admiration of all who knew him. But why dwell on the praises of my enemy, or make so long a preface to the confession of my infatuation and my ruin? Let me say at once that he saw me repeatedly from a window opposite to mine, whence, as it seemed to me, he shot forth his soul towards me from his eyes, whilst mine beheld him with a pleasure very different from that which I had experienced at our first interview, and one which constrained me to believe that everything I read in his face was the pure truth. Seeing each other in this way led to conversation. He declared his passion, and mine responded to it, with no misgivings of his sincerity, for his suit was urged with promises, oaths, tears, sighs, and every accompaniment that could make me believe in the reality of his devoted attachment. Utterly inexperienced as I was, every word of his was a cannon shot that breached the fortress of my honor. Every tear was a fire in which my virtue was consumed. Every sigh was a rushing wind that fanned the destructive flame. In fine, upon his promise to marry me in spite of his parents, who had another wife in view for him, I forgot all my maidenly reserve, and without knowing how, put myself into his power, having no other witness of my folly than a page belonging to Marco Antonio, for that is the name of the destroyer of my peace, who 2 days afterwards disappeared from the neighborhood, without any person, not even his parents, having the least idea whither he was gone. In what condition I was left, imagine if you can. It is beyond my power to describe it. I tore my hair as if it was to blame for my fault, and punished my face as thinking it the primary occasion of my ruin. I cursed my fate, and my own precipitation. I shed an infinity of tears, and was almost choked by them and by my sighs. I complained mutely to heaven, and pondered 1,000 expedients to see if there was any which might afford me help or remedy. And that which I finally resolved on was to dress myself in male apparel, and go in quest of this perfidious Aeneas, this cruel and perjured Bireno, this defrauder of my honest affections and my legitimate and well-founded hopes. Having once formed this resolution, I lost no time in putting it in execution. I put on a travelling suit belonging to my brother, saddled one of my father's horses with my own hand, and left home one very dark night, intending to go to Salamanca, whither it was conjectured that Marco Antonio might have gone, for he too is a student, and an intimate friend of my brother's. I did not omit to take at the same time a quantity of gold sufficient for all contingencies upon my journey. What most distresses me is the thought that my parents will send in pursuit of me, and that I shall be discovered by means of my dress and the horse. And even had I not this to fear, I must dread my brother's resentment, for he is in Salamanca, and should he discover me, I need not say how much my life would be in peril. Even should he listen to my excuses, the least scruple of his honor would outweigh them all. Happen what may, my fixed resolve is to seek out my heartless husband, who cannot deny that he is my husband, without belying the pledge which he left in my possession, a diamond ring, with this legend, Marco Antonio is the husband of Teodosia. If I find him, I will know from him what he discovered in me that prompted him so soon to leave me, and I will make him fulfill his plighted troth, or I will prove as prompt to vengeance as I was easy in suffering myself to be aggrieved, and will take his life, for the noble blood that runs in my veins is not to be insulted with impunity. This, Señor Cavalier, is the true and sad history you desired to hear, and which you will accept as a sufficient apology for the words and sighs that awoke you. What I would beseech of you is, that though you may not be able to remedy my misfortune, at least you may advise me how to escape the dangers that beset me, evade being caught, and accomplish what I so much desire and need. The cavalier said not a syllable in reply, and remained so long silent that Teodosia supposed he was asleep, and had not heard a word she had been saying. To satisfy herself of this, she said, "Are you asleep, señor? No wonder if you are, for a mournful tale poured into an unimpassioned ear is more likely to induce drowsiness than pity." "I am not asleep," replied the cavalier. "On the contrary, I am so thoroughly awake, and feel so much for your calamity, that I know not if your own anguish exceeds mine. For this reason I will not only give you the advice you ask, but my personal aid to the utmost of my powers. For though the manner in which you have told your tale proves that you are gifted with no ordinary intelligence, and therefore that you have been your own betrayer, and owe your sorrow to a perverted will, rather than to the seductions of Marco Antonio, nevertheless I would fain see your excuse in your youth and your inexperience of the wily arts of men. Compose yourself, señora, and sleep if you can during the short remainder of the night. When daylight comes we will consult together, and see what means may be devised for helping you out of your affliction." Teodosia thanked him warmly, and tried to keep still for a while in order that the cavalier might sleep, but he could not close an eye. On the contrary, he began to toss himself about in the bed, and to heave such deep sighs that Teodosia was constrained to ask him what was the matter. Was he suffering in any way, and could she do anything for his relief? "Though you are yourself the cause of my distress, señora," he replied, "you are not the person who can relieve it, for if you were I should not feel it." Teodosia could not understand the drift of this perplexed reply. She suspected, however, that he was under the influence of some amorous passion, and even that she herself might be the object of it, for it might well be that the fact of his being alone with one he knew to be a woman, at that dead hour of the night, and in the same bedroom, should have awakened in him some bad thoughts. Alarmed at the idea, she hastily put on her clothes without noise, buckled on her sword and dagger, and sat down on the bed to wait for daylight, which did not long delay to appear through the many openings there were in the sides of the room, as usual in inn-chambers. The cavalier on his part had made ready exactly as Teodosia had done, and he no sooner perceived the first rays of light than he started up from his bed, saying, "Get up, Señora Teodosia, and let us be gone, for I will accompany you on your journey, and never quit your side until I see Marco Antonio become your lawful husband, or until he or I shall be a dead man." And so saying, he opened the windows and the doors of the room. Teodosia had longed for daylight, that she might see what manner of man he was with whom she had been conversing all night. But when she beheld him, she would have been glad that it had never dawned, but that her eyes had remained in perpetual darkness, for the cavalier who stood before her was her brother. At sight of him she was stupefied with emotion, her face was deadly pale, and she could not utter a word. At last, rallying her spirits, she drew her dagger, and presenting the handle to her brother, fell at his feet and gasped out, "Take it, dear señor and brother, punish the fault I have committed, and satisfy your resentment, for my offense deserves no mercy, and I do not desire that my repentance should be accepted as an atonement. The only thing I entreat is that you will deprive me of life, but not of my honor, for though I have placed it in manifest danger by absenting myself from the house of my parents, yet its semblance may be preserved before the world if my death be secret." Her brother regarded her fixedly, and although her wantonness excited him to vengeance, he could not withstand this affecting appeal. With a placable countenance he raised her from the ground, and consoled her as well as he could, telling her, among other things, that as he knew of no punishment adequate to the magnitude of her folly, he would suspend the consideration of that matter for the present; and as he thought that fortune had not yet made all remedy impossible, he thought it better to seek one than at once to take vengeance on her for her levity. These words restored Theodosia to life, the colour returned to her cheeks, and her despair gave way to revived hope. Don Raphael, that was the brother's name, would speak no more on the subject, but bade her change her name from Theodosia to Teodoro, and decided that they should both proceed at once to Salamanca in quest of Marco Antonio, though he hardly expected to find him there, for as they were intimate friends, they would have met had he been at the university, unless, indeed, Marco Antonio might have shunned him from a consciousness of the wrong he had done him. The new Teodoro acquiesced in everything proposed by her brother, and the innkeeper coming in, they ordered breakfast, intending to depart immediately. Before all was ready, another traveller arrived. This was a gentleman who was known to Don Raphael and Teodoro, and the latter, to avoid being seen by him, remained in the chamber. Don Raphael, having embraced the newcomer, asked him what news he brought. His friend replied that he had just come from the port of Santa Maria, where he had left 4 galleys bound for Naples, and that he had seen Marco Antonio Adorno, the son of Don Leonardo Adorno, on board one of them. This intelligence rejoiced Don Raphael, to whom it appeared that since he had so unexpectedly learned what it was of such importance for him to know, he might regard this an omen of his future success. He asked his friend, who knew his father well, to exchange the hired mule he rode for his father's nag, giving him to understand, not that he was coming from Salamanca, but that he was going thither, and that he was unwilling to take so good an animal on so long a journey. The other obligingly consented, and promised to deliver the nag to its owner. Don Raphael and he breakfasted together, and Teodoro alone, and finally his friend pursued his journey to Casallo, where he had an estate, whilst Don Raphael excused himself from accompanying him by saying that he had to return that day to Seville. As soon as the friend was gone and the reckoning paid, Don Raphael and Teodoro mounted and bade adieu to the people of the inn, leaving them all in admiration of the comeliness of the pair. Don Raphael told his sister what news he had received of Marco Antonio, and that he proposed they should make all haste to reach Barcelona, for vessels on their way to or fro between Italy and Spain usually put in at that port, and if Marco Antonio's ship had not yet arrived there, they would wait for it, and be sure of seeing him. His sister said he should do as he thought best, for his will was hers. Don Raphael then told the muleteer who accompanied him to have patience, for he intended to go to Barcelona, but would pay him accordingly. The muleteer, who was one of the merriest fellows of his trade, and who knew Don Raphael's liberality, declared that he was willing to go with him to the end of the world. Don Raphael asked his sister what money she had. She told him she had not counted it. All she knew was that she had put her hand 7 or 8 times into her father's strong-box, and had taken it out full of gold crowns. From this, Don Raphael calculated that she might have something about 500 crowns, which, with 200 of his own, and a gold chain he wore, seemed to him no bad provision for the journey, the more so as he felt confident of meeting Marco Antonio in Barcelona. They pursued their journey rapidly without incident or impediment, until they arrived within 2 leagues of a town called Igualada, which is 9 leagues from Barcelona, and there they learned that a cavalier who was going as ambassador to Rome was waiting at Barcelona for the galleys, which had not yet arrived. Greatly cheered by this news, they pushed on until they came to the verge of a small wood, from which they saw a man running, and looking back over his shoulder with every appearance of terror. "What is the matter with you, good man?" said Don Raphael, going up to him. "What has happened to you, that you seem so frightened and run so fast?" "Have I not good cause to be frightened and to run fast," said the man, "since I have escaped by a miracle from a gang of robbers in that wood?" "Malediction! Lord save us!" exclaimed the muleteer. "Robbers at this hour! By my halidom, they'll leave us as bare as we were born." "Don't make yourself uneasy, brother," replied the man from the wood, "for the robbers have by this time gone away, after leaving more than 30 passengers stripped to their shirts and tied to trees, with the exception of one only, whom they have left to unbind the rest as soon as they should have passed a little hill they pointed out to him." "If that be so," said Calvete the muleteer, "we may proceed without fear, for where robbers have made an attack, they do not show themselves again for some days. I say this with confidence, as a man who has been twice in their hands, and knows all their ways." This fact being confirmed by the stranger, Don Raphael resolved to go on. They entered the wood, and had not advanced far, when they came upon the persons who had been robbed, and who were more than 40 in number. The man who had been left free had unbound some of them, but his work was not yet complete, and several of them were still tied to the trees. They presented a strange spectacle. Some of them stripped naked, others dressed in the tattered garments of the robbers, some weeping over their disaster, some laughing at the strange figure the others made in their robber's costume, one dolorously reciting the list of the things he had lost, another declaring that the loss of a box of Agnus Dei he was bringing home from Rome afflicted him more than all besides. In short, the whole wood resounded with the moans and lamentations of the despoiled wretches. The brother and sister beheld them with deep compassion, and heartily thanked heaven for their own narrow escape from so great a peril. But what affected Teodoro more than anything else was the sight of a lad apparently about 15, tied to a tree, with no covering on him but a shirt and a pair of linen drawers, but with a face of such beauty that none could refrain from gazing on it. Teodoro dismounted and unbound him, a favour which he acknowledged in very courteous terms, and Teodoro, to make it the greater, begged Calvete to lend the gentle youth his cloak, until he could buy him another at the first town they came to. Calvete complied, and Teodoro threw the cloak over his shoulders, asking him in Don Raphael's presence to what part of the country he belonged, whence he was coming, and whither he was going. The youth replied that he was from Andalusia, and he named as his birthplace a town which was but 2 leagues distant from that of the brother and sister. He said he was on his way from Seville to Italy, to seek his fortune in arms like many another Spaniard, but that he had had the misfortune to fall in with a gang of thieves, who had taken from him a considerable sum of money and clothes, which he could not replace for 300 crowns. Nevertheless he intended to pursue his journey, for he had not come of a race which was used to letting the ardour of its zeal evaporate at the first check. The manner in which the youth expressed himself, the fact that he was from their own neighbourhood, and above all, the letter of recommendation he carried in his face, inspired the brother and sister with a desire to befriend him as much as they could. After they had distributed some money among some of the rest as seemed in most need of it, especially among monks and priests, of whom there were 8, they made this youth mount Calvete's mule, and went on without more delay to Igualada. There they were informed that the galleys had arrived the day before at Barcelona, whence they would sail in 2 days, unless the insecurity of the roadstead compelled them to make an earlier departure. On account of this news, they rose next morning before the sun, although they had not slept all night in consequence of a circumstance which had occurred at supper, and which had more surprised and interested the brother and sister than they were themselves aware. As they sat at table, and the youth with them whom they had taken under their protection, Teodoro fixed her eyes intently on his face, and scrutinizing his features somewhat curiously, perceived that his ears were bored. From this, and from a certain bashfulness that appeared in his looks, she suspected that the supposed youth was a woman, and she longed for supper to be over that she might verify her suspicion. Meanwhile Don Raphael asked him whose son he was, for he knew all the principal people in the town he had named as his birthplace. The youth said he was the son of Don Enrique de Cardenas. Don Raphael replied that he was well acquainted with Don Enrique, and knew for certain that he had no son, but that if he had given that answer because he did not choose to make known his family, it was of no consequence, and he should not be questioned again on that subject. "It is true," said the youth, "that Don Enrique has no children, but his brother Don Sancho has." "He has no son either," replied Don Rafael, "but an only daughter, who, by the by, they say is one of the handsomest damsels in Andalusia. But this I know only by report, for though I have been often in her town, I have never seen her." "It is quite true, as you say, señor, that Don Sancho has only a daughter, but not one so handsome as fame reports. And if I said that I was the son of Don Enrique, it was only to give myself some importance in your eyes, for in fact I am only the son of Don Sancho's steward, who has been many years in his service, and I was born in his house. Having displeased my father, I carried off a good sum of money from him, and resolved to go to Italy, as I have told you, and follow the career of arms, by which men even of obscure birth have been known to make themselves illustrious." Teodoro, who listened attentively to all this conversation, was more and more confirmed in her suspicion, both by the manner and the substance of what the youth said. After the cloth was removed, and while Don Rafael was preparing for bed, she made known to him her surmise, and then, with his permission, took the youth aside, and going out with him upon a balcony which looked on the street, addressed him thus: "Don Francisco," for that was the name he had given himself, "I would fain have done you so much service that you could not help granting me anything that I should ask of you. But the short time we have known you has not permitted this. Hereafter perhaps you may know how far I deserve that you should comply with my desires. But if you do not choose to satisfy that which I am now about to express, I will not the less continue to be your faithful servant. Furthermore, before I prefer my present request, I would impress upon you that, although my age does exceed yours, I have more experience in the world than is usual at my years, and you will admit, when I tell you that it has led me to suspect that you are not a man, as your garb imports, but a woman, and one as well born as your beauty proclaims, and perhaps as unfortunate as your disguise implies, for such transformations are never made willingly, or except under the pressure of some painful necessity. If what I suspect is the case, tell me so, and I swear to you on the faith of a cavalier to aid and serve you in every way I can. That you are a woman you cannot make me doubt, for the holes in your ears make that fact very clear. It was thoughtless of you not to close them with a little flesh-colored wax, for somebody else as inquisitive as myself, and not so fit to be trusted with a secret, might discover by means of them what you have so ill concealed. Believe me, you need not hesitate to tell me who you are, in full reliance of my inviolable secrecy." The youth had listened with great attention to all Teodoro said, and before answering her a word, he seized her hands, carried them by force to his lips, kissed them with great fervor, and even bedewed them copiously with tears. Teodoro could not help sympathizing with the acute feelings of the youth, and shedding tears also. Although, when she had with difficulty withdrawn her hands from the youth's lips, he replied with a deep-drawn sigh, "I will not and cannot deny, señora, that your suspicion is true. I am a woman, and the most unfortunate of my sex, and since the acts of kindness you have conferred upon me, and the offers you make me, oblige me to obey all your commands, listen, and I will tell you who I am, if indeed it will not weary you to hear the tale of another's misfortunes." "May I never know aught else myself," replied Teodoro, "if I shall not feel a pleasure in hearing of those misfortunes equal to the pain it will give me to know that they are yours, and that will be such as if they were my own." And again she embraced and encouraged the seeming youth, who, somewhat more tranquillized, continued thus: "I have spoken the truth with regard to my native place, but not with regard to my parents. For Don Enrique is not my father, but my uncle, and his brother Don Sancho is my father. I am that unhappy daughter of his, of whom your brother says she is celebrated for her beauty, but how mistakenly you now perceive. My name is Leocadia. The occasion of my disguise you shall now hear. 2 leagues from my native town there is another, one of the wealthiest and noblest of Andalusia, where lives a cavalier of quality, who derives his origin from the noble and ancient Adornos of Genoa. He has a son, who, unless fame exaggerates his praises as it does mine, is one of the most gallant gentlemen one would desire to see. being so near a neighbor of ours, and being, like my father, strongly addicted to the chase, he often came on a visit of 5 or 6 days to our house, the greater part of that time, much of the night even included, being spent by my father and him in the field. From these visits of his, fortune, or love, or my own imprudence, took occasion to bring me down to my present state of degradation. Having observed, with more attention than became a modest and well-behaved maiden, the graceful person and manners of our visitor, and taking into consideration his distinguished lineage and the great wealth of his parents, I thought that to obtain him for my husband would be the highest felicity to which my wishes could aspire. With this thought in my head, I began to gaze at him most intently, and also, no doubt, with too little caution, for he perceived it, and the traitor needed no other hint to discover the secret of my bosom and rob me of my peace. But why should I weary you by recapitulating every minute detail of my unfortunate attachment? Let me say at once that he won so far upon me by his ceaseless solicitations, having plighted his faith under the most solemn and, as I thought, the most Christian vows that he could become my husband, that I put myself wholly at his disposal. Nevertheless, not being quite satisfied with his vows alone, and in order that the wind might not bear them away, I made him commit them to writing, and give them to me in a paper signed with his own hand, and drawn up in terms so strong and unequivocal as to remove all my mistrust. Once in possession of this paper, I arranged that he should come to me one night, climb the garden wall, and enter my chamber, where he might securely pluck the fruit destined for him alone. The night so longed for by me at last arrived. Up to this point Teodoro had listened with rapt attention, especially since she had heard the name of Adorno. But now she could contain herself no longer. "Well," she cried, suddenly interrupting the speaker, "and then what did he do? Did he keep the assignation? Were you happy in his arms? Did he confirm his written pledge anew? Was he content when he had obtained from you what you say was his? Did your father know it? What was the end of this good and wise beginning?" "The end was to bring me to what you see, for he never came." Teodoro breathed again at these words, and partly recovered her self-possession, which had been almost destroyed by the frantic influence of jealousy. Even yet she was not so free from it, but that she trembled inwardly as Leocadia continued her story. "Not only did he fail to keep the assignation, but a week after, I learned for certain that he had disappeared from home, and carried off from the house of her parents, persons of distinction in his own neighborhood, a very beautiful and accomplished young lady named Theodosia. I was nearly mad with jealousy and mortification. I pictured Theodosia to myself in imagination more beautiful than the sun, more perfect than perfection itself, and above all, more blissful than I was miserable. I read the written engagement over and over again. It was as binding as any form of words could be, but though my hopes would fain have clung to it as something sacred and inviolable, they all fell to the ground when I remembered in what company Marco Antonio had departed. I beat my face, tore my hair, and cursed my fate. But what was most irksome to me was that I could not practice these self-inflictions at all hours, in consequence of my father's presence. In fine, that I might be free to indulge my woe without impediment, I resolved to quit my home. It would seem that the execution of a bad purpose never fails for want of opportunity. I boldly purloined a suit of clothes belonging to one of my father's pages, and from himself a considerable sum of money. Then, leaving the house by night, I travelled some leagues on foot, and reached a town called Osuna, where I hired a car. 2 days afterwards I entered Seville, where I was quite safe from all pursuit. There I bought other clothes and a mule, and set out with some cavaliers who were travelling at all speed to Barcelona, that they might be in time for some galleys that were on their way to Italy. I continued my journey until yesterday, when the robbers took everything from me, and among the rest, that precious thing which sustained my soul and lightened my toils, the written engagement given me by Marco Antonio. I had intended to carry it with me to Italy, find Marco Antonio there, and present it to him as an evidence of his faithlessness and my constancy, and constrain him to fulfill his promise. At the same time I am conscious that he may readily deny the words written on this paper, since he has made naught of the obligations that should have been engraved on his soul. Besides, it is plain that if he is accompanied by the incomparable Theodosia, he will not deign to look upon the unfortunate Leocadia. But happen what may, I am resolved to die or present myself before the pair, that the sight of me may trouble their joy. This Theodosia, this enemy of my peace, shall not so cheaply enjoy what is mine. I will seek her out, I will find her, and will take her life if I can." "But how is Theodosia in fault?" said Teodoro, "if, as is very probably the case, she too has been deluded by Marco Antonio, as you, señora, have been?" "How can that be so," returned Leocadia, "if he has her with him? Being with the man she loves, what question can there be of delusion? They are together, and therefore they are happy, and would be so, though they were in the burning deserts of Libya, or the dreary wastes of Scythia. She is blessed in his arms, wherever she is, and therefore she shall pay for all I shall suffer till I find her." "It is very likely you are mistaken," said Teodoro. "I am very well acquainted with this enemy of yours, as you call her, and I know her prudence and modesty to be such, that she would never venture to quit her father's house and go away with Marco Antonio. And even had she done so, not knowing you, nor being aware of any claim you had on him, she has not wronged you at all, and where there is no wrong, vengeance is out of place. Tell me not of her modesty, señor, for I was as modest and as virtuous as any maiden in the world, and yet I have done what I have told you. That he has carried her off there is no doubt. I acknowledge, looking on the matter dispassionately, that she has not wronged me. But the pangs of jealousy which she occasions me make me abhor her. If a sword were thrust through my vitals, should I not naturally strive to pluck it out and break it to pieces? Well, well, Señora Leocadia, since the passion that sways you makes you speak so wildly, I see it is not fit time to offer you rational advice. I shall therefore content myself with repeating that I am ready and willing to render you every service in my power, and I know my brother's generous nature so well that I can boldly make you the same promise on his part. We are going to Italy, and it rests only with yourself to accompany us. One thing only I entreat, that you will allow me to tell my brother what I know of your story, that he may treat you with the attention and respect which is your due. I think you had better continue to wear male attire, and if it is to be procured in this place, I will take care that you shall be suitably equipped tomorrow. For the rest, trust to time, for it is a great provider of remedies, even for the most desperate cases." Leocadia gratefully thanked the generous Teodoro, saying he might tell his brother whatever he thought fit, and beseeching him not to forsake her, since he saw to what dangers she was exposed, if she was known to be a woman. Here the conversation ended, and they retired to rest, Theodosia in her brother's room, and Leocadia in another next to it. Don Raphael was still awake, waiting for his sister to know what had passed between her and the suspected woman, and before she lay down, he made her relate the whole to him in detail. "Well, sister," he said, when she had finished, "if she is the person she declares herself to be, she belongs to the best family in her native place, and is one of the noblest ladies of Andalusia. Her father is well known to ours, and the fame of her beauty perfectly corresponds with the evidence of our own eyes. My opinion is, that we must proceed with caution, lest she come to speak with Marco Antonio before us, for I feel some uneasiness about that written engagement she speaks of, even though she has lost it. But be of good cheer, sister, and go to rest, for all will come right at last." End of The Two Damsels, Part 1. Recording by Bob Gonzalez, Tampa, Florida. Section 30 of the Exemplary Novels of Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bob Gonzalez. The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly. The Two Damsels, Part 2. Theodosia complied with her brother's advice so far as to go to bed, but it was impossible for her to rest, so racked was she by jealous fears. Oh, how she exaggerated the beauty of Leocadia, and the disloyalty of Marco Antonio! How often she read with the eyes of her imagination his written promise to her rival! What words and phrases she added to it, to make it more sure and binding! How often she refused to believe that it was lost, and how many a time she repeated to herself that even though it were lost, Marco Antonio would not the less fulfill his promise to Leocadia without thinking of that by which he was bound to herself. In such thoughts as these she passed the night without a wink of sleep. Nor was her brother Don Raphael less wakeful, for no sooner had he heard who Leocadia was than his heart was on fire for her. He beheld her in imagination not tied to a tree or in tattered male garments, but in her own rich apparel in her wealthy father's house. He would not suffer his mind to dwell on that which was the primary cause of his having become acquainted with her, and he longed for day that he might continue his journey and find out Marco Antonio, not so much that he might make him his brother-in-law, as that he might hinder him from becoming the husband of Leocadia. In fact, he was so possessed by love and jealousy that he could have borne to see his sister comfortless and Marco Antonio fairly buried, rather than be himself without hope of obtaining Leocadia. Thus, with different thoughts, they all quitted their beds at break of day, and Don Raphael sent for the host, and asked him if he could purchase a suit of clothes in that place for a page who had been stripped by robbers. The host said he happened to have one for sale, which he would dispose of at a reasonable price. He produced it. Leocadia found that it fitted her very well. She put it on, and girt herself with sword and dagger with such sprightly grace that she enchanted Don Raphael and redoubled Theodosia's jealousy. Calvete saddled the mules, and about 8 in the morning they started for Barcelona, not intending to take the famous monastery of Monserrate on their way, but to visit it on a future occasion, whenever it might please God to send them home again with hearts more at ease. Words are not adequate to describe the feelings of the two brothers, or with what different eyes they severally regarded Leocadia, Theodosia wishing for her death, and Don Raphael for her life. Theodosia striving to find faults in her, in order that she might not despair of her own hopes, and Don Raphael finding out new perfections that more and more obliged him to love her. All these thoughts, however, did not hinder their speed, for they reached Barcelona before sunset. They admired the magnificent situation of the city, and esteemed it to be the flower of the world, the honor of Spain, the terror of all enemies near and far, the delight of its inhabitants, the refuge of strangers, the school of chivalry, the model of loyalty, in a word, a union of all that a judicious curiosity could desire in a grand, famous, wealthy, and well-built city. Upon their entering it, they heard a great uproar, and saw a multitude of people running with loud cries. They inquired the cause, and were told that the people of the galleys in the port had fallen upon those of the town. Don Raphael desired to see what was going on, though Calvete would have dissuaded him, for, as the muleteer said, he knew well what mischief came of interfering in such frays as this, which usually occurred in Barcelona when galleys put in there. In spite of this good advice, Don Raphael and his fellow travellers went down at once towards the beach, where they saw many swords drawn, and numbers of people slashing at each other without mercy, and they approached so near the scene without dismounting that they could distinctly see the faces of the combatants, for the sun was still above the horizon. The number of townspeople engaged was immense, and great crowds issued from the galleys, although their commander, Don Pedro Vique, a gentleman of Valencia, stood on the prow of the flagship, threatening all who entered the boats to succor their comrades. Finding his commands disregarded, he ordered a gun to be fired without ball, as a warning that if the combatants did not separate, the next gun he fired would be shotted. Meanwhile, Don Raphael, who narrowly watched the fray, observed among those who took part with the seamen a young man of about 22, dressed in green, with a hat of the same color, adorned with a rich loop and buttons apparently of diamonds. The skill and courage with which he fought, and the elegance of his dress, drew upon him the attention of all the spectators, and Theodosia and Leocadia both cried out as if with one voice, "Good heavens! Either my eyes deceive me, or he in green is Marco Antonio." Then with great nimbleness they dismounted, drew their swords and daggers, cleared their way through the crowd, and placed themselves one on each side of Marco Antonio. "Fear nothing, Señor Marco Antonio," cried Leocadia, "for there is one by your side who will defend your life at the cost of his own." "Who doubts it," ejaculated Theodosia, "on the other side, since I am here?" Don Raphael, who had seen and heard all this, followed his two companions, and took sides as they did. Marco Antonio was too busy smiting and defending himself to heed what his two seconds had said. He could think of nothing but fighting, and no man ever fought more bravely. But as the party of the town was every moment increasing in numbers, the people of the galleys were forced to retreat and take to the water. Marco Antonio retreated with the rest, much against his will, still attended on either side by his two valiant Amazons. By this time a Catalonian knight of the renowned house of Cardonas made his appearance on a noble charger, and throwing himself between the two parties, ordered the townspeople to retire. The majority obeyed, but some still continued to fling stones, one of which unluckily struck Marco Antonio on the breast with such force that he fell senseless into the water, in which he was wading up to his knees. Leocadia instantly raised and supported him in her arms, and Theodosia aided her. Don Raphael, who had turned aside a little to avoid a shower of stones, saw the accident which had befallen Marco Antonio, and was hastening forward to his aid, when the Catalonian knight stopped him, saying, "Stay, señor, and do me the favour to put yourself by my side. I will secure you from the insolence of this unruly rabble." "Ah, señor," replied Raphael, "let me pass, for I see that in great danger which I most love in this world." The knight let him pass, but before he could reach the spot, the crew of the flagship's boat had already taken on board Marco Antonio and Leocadia, who never let him out of her arms. As for Theodosia, whether it was that she was weary, or overcome with grief to see her lover wounded, or enraged with jealousy to see her rival with him, she had not strength to get into the boat, and would certainly have fallen in a fainting fit into the water if her brother had not opportunely come to her aid, while he himself felt no less torment than his sister at seeing Leocadia go away with Marco Antonio. The Catalonian knight, being very much taken with the goodly presence of Don Raphael and his sister, whom he supposed to be a man, called them from the shore and requested them to go with him, and they were constrained to accept his friendly offer, lest they should suffer some injury from the people, who were not yet pacified. Thereupon the knight dismounted, and with his drawn sword in his hand led them through the tumultuous throng, who made way at his command. Don Raphael looked round to see if he could discover Calvete with the mules, but he was not to be seen, for the moment his employers dismounted, he had gone off to an inn where he had lodged on previous occasions. On their arrival at the knight's abode, which was one of the principal houses in the city, he asked them in which of the galleys they had arrived. Don Raphael replied that they had not come in any, for they had arrived in the city just as the fray began, and it was because they had recognized the gentleman who was wounded with a stone that they had involved themselves in danger. Moreover, he entreated the knight would have the gentleman brought on shore, as he was one on whom his own dearest interests depended. "I will do so with great pleasure," replied the knight, "and I am sure the general will allow it, for he is a worthy gentleman and a relation of mine." Thereupon he went at once to the galley, where he found Marco Antonio under the hands of the surgeon, who pronounced his wound dangerous, being near the heart. With the general's consent he had him brought on shore with great care, accompanied by Leocadia, and carried to his own house in a litter, where he entertained the whole party with great hospitality. A famous surgeon of the city was now sent for, but he would not touch the patient's wound until the following day, alleging that it had no doubt been properly treated already, army and navy surgeons being always men of skill, in consequence of their continual experience in cases of wounds. He only desired that the patient should be placed in a quiet room and left to rest. Presently the surgeon of the galley arrived, and had a conference with his colleague, who approved of what he had done, and agreed with him in thinking the case highly dangerous. Leocadia and Teodosia heard this with as much anguish of heart as if it had been a sentence of death upon themselves, but not wishing to betray their grief, they strove to conceal it in silence. Leocadia, however, determined to do what she thought requisite for her honour, and as soon as the surgeons were gone, she entered Marco Antonio's room, where, going up to his bedside, and taking his hand in presence of the master of the house, Don Raphael, Teodosia, and others, "Señor Marco Antonio Adorno," she said, "it is now no seasonable time, considering your condition, to utter many words, and therefore I shall only entreat you to lend your ear to some few which concern, if not the safety of your body, at least that of your soul. But I must have your permission to speak, for it would ill become me, who have striven never to disoblige you from the first moment I knew you, to disturb you now in what seems almost your last." At these words Marco Antonio opened his eyes, looked steadfastly at Leocadia, and recognizing her rather by the tone of her voice than by her face, said with a feeble voice like one in pain, "Say on, señor, what you please, for I am not so far gone but that I can listen to you, nor is that voice of yours so harsh and unpleasing that I should dislike to hear it." Teodosia hearkened most attentively, and every word that Leocadia spoke pierced her heart like an arrow, and at the same time harrowed the soul of Don Raphael. "If the blow you have received," continued Leocadia, "or rather that which has struck my heart, has not effaced from your memory, Señor Marco Antonio, the image of her whom not long ago you called your glory and your heaven, you must surely call to mind who Leocadia was, and what was the promise you gave her in writing under your own hand. Nor can you have forgotten the worth of her parents, her own modesty and virtue, and the obligation you are under to her, for having always gratified you in everything you desired. If you have not forgotten all this, you may readily know, in spite of this disguise, that I am Leocadia. As soon as I heard of your departure from home, dreading lest new chances and opportunities should deprive me of what is so justly mine, I resolved, in defiance of the worst miseries, to follow you in this garb, and to search the wide world over till I found you. Nor need you wonder at this, if you have ever felt what the strength of true love is capable of, or know the frenzy of a deceived woman. I have suffered some hardships in my quest, all of which I regard as pastime, since they have resulted in my seeing you. For though you are in this condition, if it be God's will to remove you to a better world, I shall esteem myself more than happy if before your departure you do what becomes you, in which case I promise you to live in such a manner after your death that I shall soon follow you on that last inevitable journey. I beseech you then, for the love of heaven, for your own honor, and for my sake, to whom you owe more than to all the world, receive me at once as your lawful wife, not leaving it to the law to do what you have so many righteous motives for doing of your own accord." Here Leocadia ceased speaking. All present had listened to her in profound silence, and in the same way they awaited the reply of Marco Antonio. "I cannot deny, señora," he said, "that I know you. Your voice and your face will not suffer me to do that. Nor yet can I deny how much I owe to you, nor the great worth of your parents and your own incomparable modesty and virtue. I do not and never shall think lightly of you for what you have done in coming to seek me in such a disguise. On the contrary, I shall always esteem you for it in the highest degree. But since, as you say, I am so near my end, I desire to make known to you a truth, the knowledge of which, if it be unpleasant to you now, may hereafter be useful to you. I confess, fair Leocadia, that I loved you, and you loved me. And yet I confess also that my written promise was given more in compliance with your desire than my own. For before I had long signed it, my heart was captivated by a lady named Theodosia, whom you know, and whose parentage is as noble as your own. If I gave you a promise signed with my hand, to her I gave that hand itself in so unequivocal a manner that it is impossible for me to bestow it on any other person in the world. My amour with you was but a pastime from which I culled only some flowers, leaving you nothing the worse. From her I obtained the consummate fruit of love upon my plighted faith to be her husband. That I afterwards deserted you both was the inconsiderate act of a young man who thought that all such things were of little importance, and might be done without scruple. My intention was to go to Italy, and after spending some of the years of my youth there, to return and see what had become of you and my real wife. But heaven in its mercy, as I truly believe, has permitted me to be brought to the state in which you see me, in order that in thus confessing my great faults, I may fulfill my last duty in this world, by leaving you disabused and free, and ratifying on my deathbed the pledge I gave to Theodosia. If there is anything, Señora Leocadia, in which I can serve you during the short time that remains to me, let me know it, so it be not to receive you as my wife, for that I cannot. There is nothing else which I will not do, if it be in my power, to please you." Marco Antonio, who had raised himself on one arm while he spoke, now fell back senseless. Don Rafael then came forward. "Recover yourself, dear señor," he said, embracing him affectionately, "and embrace your friend and your brother, since such you desire him to be." Marco Antonio opened his eyes, and recognizing Don Rafael, embraced him with great warmth. "Dear brother and señor," he said, "the extreme joy I feel in seeing you must needs be followed by a proportionate affliction, since, as they say, after gladness comes sorrow. But whatever befalls me now, I will receive with pleasure in exchange for the happiness of beholding you." "To make your happiness more complete," replied Don Rafael, "I present to you this jewel as your own." Then, turning to look for his sister, he found her behind the rest of the people in the room, bathed in tears, and divided between joy and grief at what she saw and what she had heard. Taking her by the hand, her brother led her passively to the bedside, and presented her to Marco Antonio, who embraced her with loving tears. The rest of those present stared in each other's faces in speechless amazement at these extraordinary occurrences. But the hapless Leocadia, seeing her whom she had mistaken for Don Rafael's brother locked in the arms of him she looked on as her own husband, with all her hopes mocked and ruined, stole out of the room unperceived by the others, whose attention was engrossed by the scene about the bed. She rushed wildly into the street, intending to wander over the world, no matter whither, but she was hardly out of doors before Don Rafael missed her, and, as if he had lost his soul, began to inquire anxiously after her, but nobody could tell what had become of her. He hastened in dismay to the inn where he was told Calvete lodged, thinking she might have gone thither to procure a mule, but, not finding her there, he ran like a madman through the streets, seeking her in every quarter, till the thought struck him that she might have made for the galleys, and he turned in that direction. As he approached the shore, he heard someone calling from the land for the boat belonging to the general's galley, and soon recognized the voice as that of the beautiful Leocadia. Hearing his footsteps as he hastened towards her, she drew her sword and stood upon her guard, but perceiving it was Don Raphael, she was vexed and confused at his having found her, especially in so lonely a place, for she was aware, from many indications, that he was far from regarding her with indifference. On the contrary, she would have been delighted to know that Marco Antonio loved her as well. How shall I relate all that Don Raphael now said to Leocadia? I can give but a faint idea of the glowing language in which he poured out his soul. Were it my fate, beautiful Leocadia, he said, along with the favours of fortune, to lack also at this moment the courage to disclose to you the secret of my soul, then would there be doomed to perpetual oblivion the most ardent and genuine affection that ever was harboured in a lover's breast. But not to do it that wrong, I will make bold, señora, come of it what may, to beg you will observe, if your wounded feelings allow you, that in nothing has Marco Antonio the advantage of me, except the happiness of being loved by you. My lineage is as good as his, and in fortune he is not much superior to me. As for the gifts of nature, it becomes me not to laud myself, especially if in your eyes those which have fallen to my share are of no esteem. All this I say, adored señora, that you may seize the remedy for your disasters which fortune offers to your hand. You see that Marco Antonio cannot be yours, since heaven has already made him my sister's, and the same heaven which has taken him from you is now willing to compensate you with me, who desire no higher bliss in this life than that of being your husband. See how good fortune stands knocking at the door of the evil fortune you have hitherto known. And do not suppose that I shall ever think the worse of you for the boldness you have shown in seeking after Marco Antonio, for from the moment I determined to match myself with you, I am bound to forget all that is past. Well I know that the same power, which has constrained me so irresistibly to adore you, has brought you also to your present pass, and therefore there will be no need to seek an excuse where there has been no fault. Leocadia listened in silence to all Don Raphael said, only from time to time heaving a sigh from the bottom of her heart. Don Raphael ventured to take her hand. She did not withdraw it, and kissing it again and again, he said, Tell me, lady of my soul, that you will be so wholly in presence of these starry heavens, this calm listening sea, and these watery sands. Say that yes, which surely behoves your honour as well as my happiness. I repeat to you that I am a gentleman, as you know, and wealthy, that I love you, which you ought to esteem above every other consideration, and that, whereas I find you alone, in a garb that derogates much from your honour, far from the home of your parents and your kindred, without any one to aid you at your need, and without the hope of obtaining what you were in quest of, you may return home in your own proper and seemly garb, accompanied by as good a husband as you had chosen for yourself, and be wealthy, happy, esteemed, and even applauded by all who may become acquainted with the events of your story. All this being so, I know not why you hesitate. Say the one word that shall raise me from the depth of wretchedness to the heaven of bliss, and in so doing, you will do what is best for yourself. You will comply with the demands of courtesy and good sense, and show yourself at once grateful and discreet. Well, said the doubting Leocadia at last, since heaven has so ordained, and neither I nor any one living can oppose its will, be it as heaven and you desire, señor. I take the same power to witness with what bashfulness I consent to your wishes, not because I am unconscious of what I gain by complying with them, but because I fear that when I am yours you will regard me with other eyes than those with which hitherto perhaps you have mistakenly beheld me. But be it as it may, to be the lawful wife of Don Raphael de Villavicencio is an honour I cannot lose, and with that alone I shall live contented. But if my conduct after I am your wife give me any claim to your esteem, I will thank heaven for having brought me through such strange circumstances and such great misfortunes to the happiness of being yours. Give me your hand, Don Raphael, and take mine in exchange, and as you say, let the witnesses of our mutual engagement be the sky, the sea, the sands, and this silence, interrupted only by my sighs and your entreaties." So saying, she permitted Don Raphael to embrace her, and taking each other's hand, they solemnized their betrothal with a few tears, drawn from their eyes by the excess of joy succeeding to their past sorrows. They immediately returned to the knight's house, where their absence had occasioned great anxiety, and where the nuptials of Marco Antonio and Theodosia had already been celebrated by a priest, at the instance of Theodosia, who dreaded lest any untoward chance should rob her of her new-found hopes. The appearance of Don Raphael and Leocadia, and the account given by the former of what had passed between them, augmented the general joy, and the master of the house rejoiced as if they were his own near relations, for it is an innate characteristic of the Catalonian gentry to feel and act as friends towards such strangers as have any need of their services. The priest, who was still present, desired that Leocadia should change her dress for one appropriate to her sex, and the knight at once supplied both the ladies with handsome apparel from the wardrobe of his wife, who was a lady of the ancient house of the Granolliques, famous in that kingdom. The surgeon was moved by charity to complain that the wounded man talked so much and was not left alone. But it pleased God that Marco Antonio's joy, and the little silence he observed, were the very means of his amendment, so that when they came to dress his wound next day, they found him out of danger, and in a fortnight more he was fit to travel. During the time he kept his bed, he had made a vow that if he recovered, he would go on a pilgrimage on foot to Santiago de Galicia, and in the fulfillment of that vow he was accompanied by Don Raphael, Leocadia, Theodosia, and even by the muleteer Calvete, unusual as such pious practices are with men of his calling. But he had found Don Raphael so liberal and good-humoured that he would not quit him till he had returned home. The party having to travel on foot as pilgrims, the mules were sent on to Salamanca. The day fixed for their departure arrived, and equipped in their dalmaticas, and with all things requisite, they took leave of their generous and hospitable friend, the knight Don Sancho de Cardona, a man of most illustrious blood and personally famous, and they pledged themselves that they and their descendants, to whom they should bequeath it as a duty, should perpetually preserve the memory of the singular favours received from him, in order that they might not be wanting at least in grateful feeling, if they could not repay them in any other way. Don Sancho embraced them all, and said it was a matter of course with him to render such services or others to all whom he knew or supposed to be Castilian hidalgos. They repeated their embraces twice, and departed with gladness, mingled with some sorrow. Travelling by easy stages to suit the strength of the lady pilgrims, they reached Monserrate in 3 days, remained as many more there, fulfilling their duties as good Catholic Christians, and resuming their journey, arrived without accident at Santiago, where they accomplished their vows with all possible devotion. They determined not to quit their pilgrim garbs until they reached their homes. After travelling towards them leisurely, they came at last to a rising ground, whence Leocadia and Theodosia looked down upon their respective birthplaces, nor could they restrain their tears at the glad sight which brought back to their recollection all their past vicissitudes. From the same spot they discovered a broad valley, which divided the 2 townships, and in it they saw under the shades of an olive tree a stalwart knight, mounted on a powerful charger, armed with a strong keen lance, and a dazzling white shield. Presently they saw, issuing from among some olive trees, 2 other knights similarly armed, and of no less gallant appearance. These 2 rode up to the first, and after remaining a while together they separated. The first knight and one of the 2 others set spurs to their horses, and charging each other like mortal enemies, began mutually to deal such vigorous thrusts, and to avoid or parry them with such dexterity, that it was plain they were masters in that exercise. The third knight remained a spectator of the fight without quitting his place. Don Raphael, who could not be content with a distant view of the gallant conflict, hurried down the hill, followed by the other three, and came up close to the two champions, just as they had both been slightly wounded. The helmet of one of them had fallen off, and as he turned his face toward Don Raphael, the latter recognized his father, and Marco Antonio knew that the other was his own, whilst Leocadia discovered hers in the third knight, who had not fought. Astounded at this spectacle, the two brothers instantly rushed between the champions, crying out, "Stop, cavalier, stop! We who call on you to do so are your own sons. Father, I am Marco Antonio, for whose sake, as I guess, your honored life is put to this peril. Allay your anger, cast away your weapons, or turn them against another enemy, for the one before you must henceforth be your brother." The two knights instantly stopped, and looking round, they observed that Don Sancho had dismounted and was embracing his daughter, who briefly narrated to him the occurrences at Barcelona. Don Sancho was proceeding to make peace between the combatants, but there was no need of that, for he found them already dismounted and embracing their sons with tears of joy. There now appeared at the entrance of the valley a great number of armed men on foot and on horseback. These were the vassals of the three knights, who had come to support the cause of their respective lords. But when they saw them embracing the pilgrims, they halted, and knew not what to think, until Don Sancho briefly recounted to them what he had learned from his daughter. The joy of all was unbounded. 5 of the vassals immediately mounted the pilgrims on their own horses, and the whole party set out for the house of Marco Antonio's father, where it was arranged that the 2 weddings should be celebrated. On the way, Don Raphael and Marco Antonio learned that the cause of the quarrel which had been so happily ended was a challenge sent to the father of the latter by the fathers of Theodosia and Leocadia, under the belief that he had been privy to the acts of seduction committed by his son. The 2 challengers, having found him alone, would not take advantage of him, but agreed to fight him one after the other, like brave and generous knights. The combat, nevertheless, must have ended in the death of one or all of them, but for the timely arrival of their children, who gave thanks to God for so happy a termination of the dispute. The day after the arrival of the pilgrims, Marco Antonio's father celebrated the marriages of his son and Theodosia, Don Raphael and Leocadia, with extraordinary magnificence. The 2 wedded pairs lived long and happily together, leaving an illustrious progeny, which still exists in their 2 towns, which are among the best in Andalusia. Their names, however, we suppress, in deference to the 2 ladies, whom malicious or prudish tongues might reproach with levity of conduct. But I would beg of all such to forbear their sentence, until they have examined themselves, and seen whether they too have not been assailed some time or other by what are called the arrows of Cupid, weapons whose force is truly irresistible. Calvete was made happy with the gift of the mule which Don Raphael had left at Salamanca, and with many other presents, and the poets of the time took occasion to employ their pens in celebrating the beauty and the adventures of the 2 damsels, as bold as they were virtuous, the heroines of this strange story. End of recording. End of The 2 Damsels, Part 2. Recording by Bob Gonzalez. End of The Exemplary Novels by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by Walter K. Kelly.